contributor, let's call him that, co-host of the Hawk Zone Rundown, Bryce Coots, will be joining me right after this. Let's get into it all on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
The show brought to you by the folks at Doer, built for doing, flagship stores in Denver and Los Angeles. Lifestyle apparel for every occasion. And if you haven't heard me talk about them before, you're going to hear me talk about them again. These Stretch Performance jeans are my daily go-to. They are light. They are stretchy, 20% stretch. They're built with breathable, antibacterial, and sustainable materials. They move with you, but they are also built tough. They are built for doing. I cannot get enough of what Doer makes. And right now, if you want to try them out, they'll give you 20% off on your first order at shopdoer.com/forever. That's shopdoer, DUER/forever for 20% off your first order. Doer, built for doing. All right, so the big news today, DK Metcalf traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a second-round draft pick, but that came after a whole lot of other moves on the roster, and we're going to get into all of that as promised. Bryce Coots joining me. And Bryce, we knew that today would be busy to some extent. We knew there would be some moves made because they have to set things up for tomorrow, 10 a.m. Pacific time, really the unofficial start of free agency. And even though deals aren't supposed to be struck, you'll see it leaking out tomorrow. Final deals will be made. And it kind of like John Schneider just decided, he just told his wife Tracy today, hey, I'm going to be in my office. I'm not going to be around. I'm just going to get everything done today so we can wake up tomorrow with a clean slate. Your thoughts today on everything that we saw?
Well, Jaron Reed and Ernest Jones were the two guys I had prioritized outside of Josh Jobe getting re-signed for this team. And so when I saw those deals come through, I went, good. They're assessing and they're establishing their defense. They're going forward. They got Ernest Jones, which I think is a great deal. I think in total, he's probably going to be like the 10th, maybe highest paid linebacker inside. So it's a great deal. You're not giving him top 5 money. And you're going to keep building this elite defense that we saw finish out the year. I had a feeling when they traded Geno that there's a whole reset coming on offense. And it didn't make sense to keep DK once you trade away your win now type of quarterback. And when it came out, it was the Steelers. I had been kind of told by a couple sources it was down to the Panthers and the Steelers in a bit of a bidding war. Who was going to give DK what he wanted contractually. And we saw the money that the Steelers forked out. Like, that's a lot of dough. And as much as I love DK Metcalf and I love what he did in Seattle, I would not have been happy if I had seen that contract given to him by the Seattle Seahawks.
He's going to be almost 33 by the end of that deal. Like receivers that are built like him and who have games like his just don't age well. We've seen that over the last couple of years. We've seen it with DeAndre Hopkins. We've seen it with some other players.
Jones.
Yeah, once they reach 30, they really slow down, and man, that's a lot of money to give to someone who's not a complete player. Now, I do want to reiterate, I have for years, and I've said it on the record. It's all over my show and my Twitter feed for the last couple of years. I was on the side of you keep Geno because good quarterbacks are hard to find, and he's a good quarterback that hasn't been properly supported up till this point. You keep DK Metcalf because he's a unique player that really impacts your locker room and your identity and makes big plays, and you keep your best players. But the fact that both those guys didn't want to be here ultimately, asked to be traded essentially, and commanded that kind of money this late in their career, I just wouldn't have paid that. I was thinking all along it'd be something in the range of 3 years because that's what the Seahawks like to do. And maybe ultimately that's what cost them both of these players, because they were only offering Geno a 2-year deal, probably only offering DK 3 because that's what they do. They give Jaron Reed a 3-year contract today. They give Ernest Jones a 3-year contract. I want to talk about the offense in a second, and that's your area of expertise. But the thing that really encourages me on defense, when Pete Carroll was fired a year and a half ago, it was, the team was failing on both sides of the football. The offense just was inconsistent and not as productive as we had hoped because of offensive line issues, among other things. And the defense was just a sieve. It was terrible, which put even more pressure on the offense. The defense got fixed. And we all saw what happened after the Ernest Jones trade and some of the other moves that were made in installing Tyrese Knight and Kobe Bryant. It's well documented what helped turn that thing around, in addition to just everything clicking with the new scheme and the new coaching staff and the new system. Finish out the season, second half of the season, they're a top 10 defense. They are now locked up. All 11 starters that finished last year are under contract. Long term, like you can look ahead now, play around on over the cap if y'all don't believe me, you're skeptical. And this defense, at least the starting 11, is in place for the next 2 or 3 years. And so you can and it's mostly young. Leo Williams is the oldest guy on the roster. And he's barely 30, right? 30, 31, and players at his position tend to age well. So the defense is taken care of, which allows you to make these big, bold moves on offense because you have the belief that the defense can sustain the growing pains. Is that how you feel?
I do. The only one in that in that 11 of that you were talking about that I think they need to get done, and I hope they get done this offseason, is Kobe Bryant. He's the only one that's on the last year of his deal. But you're right, Dan. Everybody else is locked up. Everybody else is here for at least another year or 2 years. It's going to be very interesting to see how aggressive John Schneider is now on the offensive side, because he has that stability on defense with a defense that is ascending. They got better. They continually got better, and we're playing really good football even up to the last game of the year. And you're going to have Mike McDonald now more familiar with these pieces, the guys he wants in the building. That's where I think you can see why they decided to do this and make this pivot. You moved off your OC. It didn't work. You need to create an identity that matches what your head coach wants.
Yeah.
Now, the one person in this whole thing that I feel kind of sorry for is Clint Kubiak. Shows up to his new job, and all the guys that he was promised he potentially was going to get to work with are out the door except for one, and that's JSN.
See, now I get that viewpoint. I'm going to push back on that a little bit and give you a little devil's advocate here. I was just about to say that what gives me even more confidence that the time is right to make these big changes on offense is the staff they brought in. So much experience, right? Clint Kubiak's only 37 years old, but he spent his entire life in football learning from Mike Shanahan and his dad, Gary, and Kyle Shanahan and Kevin O'Connell, all of them, right? And then you bring in Rick Dennison, 15 years of experience in the league, and John Benton, 15 years of experience in the league, and Justin Outen and Andrew Janocko, this incredibly experienced staff that's all familiar with working with each other. I can guarantee you that throughout the process of hiring that staff and bringing them in, this possibility was discussed, and that they would have to sign off on it. And I think maybe even prompted some of these moves because they were able to look at Mike McDonald, John Schneider, and go, there's other ways we can win. Or maybe even, when you look at the McVay and Shanahan system, there's a requirement on the part of outside receivers. They got to be good route runners, really, really good route runners that can run an entire route tree. And maybe they looked at Schneider and said, look, we'd love to keep the guy. There's some ways we can use him. We see his strengths and we'll lean into those. But we might be better off with a more complete receiver.
No, and I definitely think that was a conversation. This offense, this West Coast offense that really comes all the way back from Bill Walsh, is very much that, Dan. It's based on rhythm. It's based on timing. That's what it looks for in its quarterback, for its receivers and their ability to run the route tree and create separation on their own, running intermediate and short routes, and relying on a run game that can be effective. And with DK, as much as I love what a physical specimen is and what he could do, I don't think his skill set, like you alluded to earlier, doesn't age well. And he can't run all the routes in the route tree. He has a finite skill set of running routes at a certain level, and in others that it considerably drops off. And that's where I just look at, even a couple of the interceptions this year that were on Geno, DK ran the wrong route. DK couldn't run the right route, maybe, even if he wanted to, depending on his skill set. The interception on the over route against the 49ers that everyone was so mad at Geno about, DK ran the wrong route. He couldn't get the break to get inside. The DB beat him to the ball. The one against Minnesota when we were trying to move the ball back down the field.
Yeah.
To me, what the moves they've made have signaled is they are changing their offensive philosophy and doing it at a drastic rate. It's not we're going to do a little tweak here and a little. It's like, no, we're going to go right back down to studs and build this thing back up the way that we need to, because I think they look at it on the defensive side and going, hey, look, we made acquisitions, we tore things down, we rebuilt it, and look at what we got. Now we got to do this on offense.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to Gino, I truly believe that they had no intention of moving him.
Nope.
And that they probably wouldn't have had to if Pete Carroll doesn't get a job in the NFL this year. Like, I just don't think there was any other market for Geno Smith with anyone else. It's probably going to come out in the next couple of days that the Raiders have signed him to a 3 or 4 year deal at about $45 million a year. I don't think anyone else in the league was willing to do that for him. And the Seahawks went to him reportedly with a 2-year deal at about that number. So he was going to make the average annual value that he thinks he's worth. But he was so upset apparently about the 2 years that his camp didn't even offer a counter offer. Like, they were just done. And there's some indication that maybe at that point they said, negotiations are over, which Seahawks are facing a $16 million roster bonus on the 16th of this month. They were going to have to make a move. And so I think John just talked on his radio show 4 days ago about having to pivot. He said these next 5 to 7 days are the ultimate example of when you have to keep your head on a swivel at all times and be able to pivot quickly if something doesn't go your way. I think as he sat there and said those things that day, I don't think the Geno thing had come to a head yet.
No, it hadn't come to a head yet until late that night is when it finally came to the, hey, this is it. This is where we want to go. So move us there. And it just came, that whole situation with Geno wanted to play for Pete. You could tell when Pete got fired, it really bothered Geno. Pete's the only coach that really, truly, not saying that Mike McDonald hasn't, but really believed in Geno and really trusted Geno. And I think you're right. If Pete doesn't come back into the NFL, Geno Smith's probably the Seattle Seahawks quarterback still.
100% agree. I think the Chip Kelly connection is significant too. I think he has to be familiar with him because his nephew, right, had a tremendous breakout freshman season at Ohio State, the receiver there, and so he's got that feedback, right, on Chip Kelly and the kind of offense he's going to run, and knew they had all the cap space down there and all the money to spend, everything else. This is also a really good example of how, moving to Las Vegas really changed the game for the Raiders. They were cash strapped the last 10 years. They couldn't offer these big, huge extensions like they did last year for Christian Wilkins because they couldn't pay the cash up front. And now they're able to make all these moves and bring in a quarterback and give Max Crosby a new extension, everything else. So happy for Geno. I think it's a great landing spot for him. I do think, assuming that the Raiders improve their offensive line, their interior offensive line, and they've got some pieces in place down there that, a couple of tweaks to that offense, add a receiver, get a stud running back, and the Geno detractors who think he's garbage are going to see a whole different player down there. Now, let's talk about the quarterback situation in Seattle, because I know I've only got you for about 10 more minutes. It's widely expected and rumored and reported to be Sam Darnold. I said on the reaction show the other day with you that, my assumption is that John Schneider knows exactly how much Sam Darnold is going to cost. And then those reports also indicate that he's mutually interested. He thinks Seattle would be a good spot for him. And so I don't think he makes the Geno move without knowing exactly where he can pivot. So I do think Darnold's the move. But until it's official, right? There's reports today that Pittsburgh's going to make a run at him. Until the contract is inked, or at least reported, if it happens tomorrow, we don't really know. And so do you think there's any other veteran possibility out there and it's not just Sam Darnold or bust?
Well, you've heard the rumors about Aaron Rodgers. I don't even believe that that's really a true thing. I think that's more of we're throwing something out there so it may distract people.
To me, it felt like a leak from the team to try and let Sam Darnold know, hey, if you've got competition out there, we're not set on you. We're looking.
No, and I agree. I think that's exactly what it is. I think Justin Fields could be a viable option here. I think he's someone that you could bring in potentially. I don't think that's the expectation. I really do think for John, like his move off of Geno was probably due to inside information from the combine and everything that if they give a contract of similar value to what Baker got a few years ago with the kind of same structure,
yeah,
you're going to get Sam Darnold. He's a West Coast kid. He gets to come here, and they're probably going to give him a 3-year deal, I would assume is probably what it's going to be. Other veteran quarterbacks out there, and this is where it gets really interesting because there's a real, sorry, Dan.
That's all right.
Drop off the cliff when it comes to talent. Like Russ, I don't know what the deal is with him. Daniel Jones is apparently picking between the Colts and the Vikings.
Makes sense.
There's always the Zach Wilson potential now that Jared Stidham's been re-signed in Denver.
Yeah, the bounce back guys are kind of that next level.
And I don't think John makes this move if he's going to a bounce back guy, because that really is putting your job, like, you're going to put in the hands of your career in Zach Wilson. Like, I don't see that being the case. And as much as people may be scared of Sam Darnold, based on what he did this last year in a similar offensive system, at least there's more credibility to it potentially being better and not taking as much of a step back to ownership. What I do think all of this signals, though, for the first time, I think we can honestly say the Seattle Seahawks will not walk out of this draft without a decent investment in a quarterback.
We have a surprise special guest in the green room. I know you guys are going to flip over in just 10 minutes or so onto your Hawks Zone Rundown channel, which is now affiliated with the Field Goals. And let me get rid of this banner. Executive editor Mookie Alexander from Field Goals joining us here for a couple of minutes. Mookie, let's just get right to it. Your reactions to not just today, but these last 48 to 72 hours, which has been as tumultuous and dynamic as any 72-hour period we may have ever seen.
Yeah, I guess we're in shelter-in-place mode. Like you are not allowed to leave the house until the clear sign is given that the Seahawks are actually going to go a day without doing something.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think that it was just a few days ago that we started off with, Rayshon Jenkins, George Fant, they all got cut. This is the boring part of the offseason. Then everything else will just be business as usual. No, this is the dam bursting times 100.
Yeah.
So like the year that Russ got traded and then they cut Bobby on the same day or like in the same time frame, like that almost doesn't even compare to what we're seeing right now, because there is a different feel to trading Geno when it looked like he was going to get extended. At least there was a little bit more, reading between the lines with Russ.
Sure.
And then the DK trade, I mean, I guess the drama there was that he requested the trade as opposed to Seattle is actively shopping him and he wanted to stay. I didn't expect Pittsburgh to be in the mix. I thought that Carolina, Green Bay, even the Chargers and New England would have been, I guess, my top 4 options. But Pittsburgh, it makes sense for them. Kind of makes me wonder if they're going to keep Russ, because if there was ever a quarterback who knows how to get him the deep ball, like Wilson is on the decline, no doubt about it. His arm still works for now. And him and Metcalf had that chemistry from the first 3 seasons they were together. So good for Pittsburgh, I guess. They're going to take a big swing. They're not known for taking these types of big swings, and that's part of why, kind of similarly to Seattle, they've been stuck in this rut. They're like a step above Seattle's middling, where they're regularly in the playoffs, but they're also losing a lot in the wild card round non-competitively. So draft capital, big for Seattle. They got 5 picks, in the top 100. And I at this point, it feels, and I just caught the tail end of what Bryce said, it feels like they have to take a quarterback early. I didn't say take a quarterback in the 5th round with all the draft capital they have.
Right.
Take a quarterback early. Whether they sign Darnold tomorrow, they sign somebody else, or they trade for Aaron Rodgers or sign Aaron Rodgers, they are going to be taking a quarterback for the first time since 2018. And if you want to consider Alex Magoo a throwaway pick, like this is their first real quarterback investment through the draft since Russell Wilson in 2012. So this is a big moment for John Schneider. The Band-Aid has been ripped off on offense. I don't want to call it a full-scale rebuild.
No.
Ernest and Jaron just got re-signed today. And those are now like the 8th and 9th most important stories just over the last 96 hours.
Yeah. But we were talking about before you hopped in that, now this locks up all 11 guys who started on defense at the end of last year, and they're all locked up fairly long term. You can really count on this foundation of the defense being set now. And you're right, though, because I thought I had a minute to go from one spot to the next while I was working today. I had about a 15-minute drive, and I missed the Ernest Jones deal. everything flying fast and furious, I kept getting all these notifications on my phone directly from Adam Schefter. By the way, signing up for the direct notifications through the ESPN app is the greatest thing ever. Like I'm getting those things before they're hitting Twitter. And I saw the deal with the Buffalo linebacker, and then I saw the Devontae Adams deal. There were so many notifications. I missed Jones until I, got to where I was going and opened my laptop, and I was about 40 minutes late. So, look, we can talk all we want about how it's hard to let go of players that we're attached to. I really liked all these players. I wanted them to still be on the roster. I wanted them to find a way. But for those who do what we do, we're a little bit twisted up here, right? And this stuff's kind of fun. This is the next few days are going to be, and the end of April is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's going to be, it's going to be very interesting to see how this all kind of plays out. I think, 10 a.m. tomorrow Pacific time, things start to legally be allowed to be announced. I think you're going to hear a lot of stuff around Seattle, like more than we've heard probably in the last decade plus, about what Seattle's doing, who they're involved with, where this money going to go. And the draft now gets that more interesting. How many pro days is John Schneider going to be at for quarterbacks and receivers?
Right. All of them.
That's going to be the thing. Is it going to be like when we had pick 5 and we went to all the QB pro days and had all those meetings and all those photos? Now it's like, okay, yeah, there's a legitimate thing that they're going to take somebody this year, whether it's round 1, 2, or 3. That's where Seattle's going to take a quarterback this year.
Yeah. And I think for those skeptics that would argue that they don't expect to see anything impactful or significant in free agency because that's not the MO typically. I think these moves over the last 3 days have to signal, that's exactly what's coming. I mean, John Schneider has basically set this roster up so that all of these resources, and right now the Seahawks sit with the 4th most cap space in the league this year and the most cap space in 2026. They can be as aggressive as they want. And they're going to use a significant portion of that money to fix the one glaring weakness on this team that's holding it back. And that's the offensive line. I'll be absolutely shocked if they don't sign at least one, maybe more significant players that play up there. Otherwise none of the rest of this makes sense. You have to spend that money or it just goes to waste.
Yeah, because you look at the interior offensive line, both guard spots are going to be up in the air. And we don't know how this coaching staff is going to view Christian Haynes. Hopefully a lot better than the previous one did. But even ignoring that, you would think they're not going to re-sign Tomlinson. In fact, I think that just with re-signing Jones and Reed, they have no particular obligation to re-sign any of their other unrestricted free agents. Like they could
that was it. They took care of them all. Yeah.
That's it. And they don't have to worry about comp picks because like they've already kept both. So comp picks aren't going to be a thing. Don't worry about that at all. So they can be aggressive looking for guards. And yeah, they might have to overpay for a guard. But you know what? It's a lot better than repeatedly signing guys for $2 million, $3 million contracts who've got no long-term future. Just go over a lot of the recent Schneider free agency classes. And then on offense, at least, how many of them were really just 1 year and done? So no long-term solution. Not even like on the defensive side, Julian Love, short-term contract turned into a bigger contract. Same thing with Chen and Nwosu. And way back in the day, same with Cliff and Michael Bennett. We haven't really had that on offense. So I'm hoping that this offseason is dedicated to rebuilding the offense. I trust what McDonald does on defense. Doesn't look like unless they shock us all by they say they're going to deal Woolen or they're going to make some other really monstrous trade on that front. Defense, you can kind of just leave by the wayside. You can add some draft picks. You can add some, cheaper free agent depth. But on offense, look, you win in this league with offense. I know that the Eagles smushed the Chiefs because they have an elite defense, but they also had an offense that Kansas City couldn't stop.
Yep.
So this is an offense-driven league. And yeah, on the surface, I was going to take a step back because there's no continuity now, losing your top 2 receivers and losing Geno Smith. But if you can at least build the foundation for a great offense with your draft picks, with your free agent signings, then I guess the suffering won't be all that bad if there has to be a short-term suffering. But the other side of it is if you whiff and it's going to be a brutal watch, then Schneider is really under some serious pressure. But the fact of the matter is he was decisive as far as we're ripping this Band-Aid off. No 2-timeline thing anymore. We're getting new guys in. What we've been doing isn't working. We're going to try something different. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. I don't even necessarily agree with it, but at least it is something different than what we have experienced over the last few years.
I think that's a great point, because the MO for the last 10 years under Carroll and Schneider was to basically be risk averse, because they've missed on some big moves in both trades and in the draft, and try to keep the band together basically, and just tweak the roster every year, believing they were on the cusp of being a contender. Well, it's almost as if Gino and DK in a way sort of did them a favor. Might be a little bit of strong terminology. I think that might be a little fair, but I can't think of anything else at the moment. But it forced him into a situation where he had to be bold, when maybe initially heading into this offseason, he didn't think he was going to, and they were going to try to keep as much continuity as they could.
The thing for me that's kind of interesting about this, if you look at the three guys that are now gone, the three main staples of this offense, all have a similar thing. They were all very much Pete Carroll guys. Tyler to a different extent, because his was more due to, I think age and stuff. But Gino and DK were very connected to Pete Carroll and his philosophy and how Pete did things. I partly wonder if, because of this new direction they want to go in and how they want to run this offense through Clint Kubiak, and what maybe Clint Kubiak is already kind of envisioned and spread to Mike McDonald and John Schneider. I just wonder, because the fact Gino didn't come back with a counteroffer is being reported now when he got given his deal.
Yep.
DK requested a trade, and I believe someone put out that DK wanted to go to a contender. That was a big staple, and he didn't really view Seattle as a contender. I just look at it all going, I think part of this might have been messaging too, in a slight way, that if we're going to go into Mike McDonald, we can't have anything that lingers to an extent. This is all just my own theory here, but I just find it very interesting that these three main staples of what Pete Carroll redid after the Rest trade are the guys that are now gone as they're trying to voyage ahead now with Mike McDonald.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys both this question. Up until this point, from the end of the season till now, on the verge of free agency, knowing that, a whole bunch of stuff's going to happen later this week, to this point, has John Schneider had the perfect offseason?
I don't know yet. Certainly, as far as creating cap space, I mean, that's about as good as you can get, because they have a lot of room. Now, there are some talent deficiencies by moving on from the players that you did, but it just means that you have the opportunity now to spend the money a little bit differently. Personally, I prefer to see a very expensive offense and a cheaper defense, but you know what? This defense is inexpensive right now. Yeah. So, I mean, you got Leonard on a big contract. Ernest is on a pretty reasonable deal right now, but Julian Love, good contract. Woolen, Witherspoon, etc. They're all on rookie deals. So time to splash on offense and see what you can do here. So with Schneider, I see somebody in the comments going, he might have a longer leash than we think. Well, his contract is up, I believe, in the 2027 draft. So if I'm going to go against my own argument that this year is it for him, and if there's no playoffs, he's fired, the second option here is he's convinced ownership that we're really not that close. Even with the 10-7 record, there's a bit of a false dawn with some of the wins they had against very poor opposition. We're willing to kind of eat it for 2025. In other words, don't expect a grand step towards Super Bowl contention or anything like that. If it happens, cool. But if it doesn't, it's not the worst thing in the world. And then 2026 is the ultimate, you know what, or get off the pot. That to me, that is the other possibility as far as John Schneider's job security goes. And as you said, Bryce, you mentioned the Pete Carroll stuff. That was in my op-ed yesterday that did zero traction because we had a million other things going. I feel like the Geno Smith trade was the real end of the Pete Carroll era, because we associate great teams with the head coach quarterback combination, unless you're Joe Gibbs and you can win with any quarterback. This is going to be the first time since 2010 that we're going to have a quarterback on the Seahawks roster who has no prior ties to Pete Carroll. That we assume, of course. So that's going to be Mike McDonald winning with his quarterback, not Mike McDonald trying to win with Pete's quarterback. And I feel like it's an important distinction to make. And I also feel like some of the hostility towards Geno is kind of like a Pete by proxy thing. Of we want to move on from Pete's. We also want to move on from some of Pete's favorite players whom we feel shouldn't have had roster spots as long as they've had it.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that the guys that wanted to move on were offensive. It's part of the risk that was discussed when you hire a defensive head coach, right? And then you look at that side of the ball, and clearly Ernest Jones wanted to be here, Jaron Reed wanted to be here, Josh Jobe wanted to be here. Like that Ernest Jones contract, I don't know what happened, but over the last few days, we've seen 3 other middle linebackers, his almost precise age or in that range, signed the exact same deal, right? 3 years, $50 million, $30 million guaranteed. 3 other guys in the last 48 hours have signed basically that exact same structure. And they get Ernest for 3 years and only 15 million guaranteed. I don't know if that was maybe a concern about the knee or just an indication of how badly he wanted to be here. But I had to refresh that thing a couple of times just to make sure I wasn't reading it wrong.
No Adorn Schefter shenanigans.
Yeah.
Ian Rappaport with an extra P. No fake stuff.
Right. They got a decimal point wrong or something. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know you guys got to go, right? So
Bryce,
I'll let you.
Bryce didn't have his thoughts on. Excuse me, Bryce didn't have his thoughts on whether Schneider has had the perfect offseason so far.
Okay, go ahead and answer that for me, and then I want to ask you one other question, kind of to combo with that.
Okay.
In terms. Hold on one second. I want to give you the second half of that question. In terms of John's job security that Mookie referenced, what do you think is more important for him to get right over the next 12 months? Fix the offensive line beyond the shadow of a doubt, or find a quarterback?
Ooh. Okay, so the first part of this about perfect offseason, I'll start with that. I would say if the goal is to rebuild and actually go to try and contend, he has started it correctly. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but he has started on the right foot because we're not down this kind of fork in the road and trying to play a little bit of both. Yeah. He is now committed to a full offensive rebuild in a way.
That's a good way to put it.
When I come to the part about how does it, go going forward, I think he has to fix the offensive line because it doesn't matter if you get a quarterback and you can't block for the guy. He has to get the offensive line right. If that means you do sign Sam Darnold and say you don't take a quarterback this year, just say hypothetically they roll Sam Darnold and Sam Howell, but you fix the offensive line and you get a top 15, top 17 offensive line from being 32, 31. You're now in the mid pack and going upward with talent because you have young talent already in the tackles. And then you take a quarterback next year, whether it be like a Garrett Nussmeier or a Drew Allar, a Cade Klubnik, and you put them behind an established running game. And, you don't even have to press them in because you have a Sam Darnold that you can still roll out if he has a good year. It just sets things up so much better than, okay, we've addressed a little bit of the offensive line, and then we went and grabbed a quarterback. It's like, get the offensive line. You've been waiting for over a decade now to have funds to go get and establish yourself a better offensive line to run this new offense you're going to go in. Go do that. If he does that with the money that's allocated, sure, they take a swing on a dart, Ewers, McCord, Shuck, one of these guys, and they sign Sam Darnold, and none of those quarterback situations work out, I still will be happier that the offensive line set and the other pieces are around or in place, and then you plug your quarterback in like you did in 2012.
In the Darnold thing, I've heard a lot of this today. Like, anyone who watched those last 2 games of the year last year and thinks that he's going to be any better than Geno if the offensive line's not great because he's terrible under pressure. It's funny to me that people are so willing to take a 2-game sample size versus 2 playoff teams to end the season and just throw away the 15 games up until that point where there's tons of reps on tape of him really picking teams apart when they try to pressure him. So, but you mentioned that the Baker Mayfield sort of landmark as kind of, and I tweeted that out earlier today, took a screenshot of his contract and over the cap, and his first year cap hit in that, I think it was 3 years, 105 million, was it? His first year cap hit was under $7 million. I mean, it's pretty remarkable what they might be able to get Sam Darnold for and really not impact the cap that much. It's interesting that I feel like that's, what do you think, Mookie? I'll ask you this one first. If one domino is going to fall first, do you think it's more important, like when we wake up tomorrow and 10 a.m. hits and we start seeing all the moves, is it more important they get Darnold done first, or is it Will Freeze, Drew Dahlman, the offensive lineman?
I'm not expecting them to get Dahlman. So I think if they can get Darnold, whom lest we forget, there's a report from Diana Rossini, the Steelers are interested. Boy, would that be one heck of a plot twist. But if they can get Darnold, and he's really the only worthwhile free agent right now in the quarterback market whom I would like to start and think that Seattle can compete. Like if they take Fields or Zach Wilson or whomever else of that kind of draft bust mold and start them, then I get the sense that they're kind of not punting the 2025 season, but it's a tryout process. But with Darnold, we've seen that you can win with him. The Vikings just did it. Now, at the very least, even if Darnold takes a statistical step back this year, we've seen that he can be a functional starter in this league, and that's good for him, and he's still pretty young. But if they can get their quarterback, I think that would ease a lot of concerns regarding Seahawks fans and the plan at quarterback, because that's kind of the thing. You've traded Geno. What is your follow-up plan? Because when they traded Russ, they hadn't even signed Geno yet. They acquired Locke. So for a brief period of time, we thought Locke was going to be the successor, but then they re-signed Geno later on in free agency, and then we had the competition after they didn't draft a quarterback. So if they sign Darnold, it doesn't preclude them from drafting a quarterback, but it does give us that idea that, all right, they've got their quarterback. Now go attack the offensive line. And to me, this entire offseason is going to be centered around, I think, 4 things: 3 on offense, 1 on defense: quarterback, offensive line, wide receiver, and then interior defensive line and or another complementary edge rusher, depending on what they do with Chenna. So I think that's pretty much it for Seattle on that front as far as priority in the offseason.
And the cool thing about that is if you do go sign at least one significant interior offensive lineman, you get your quarterback locked up. Let's say it's Darnold, because that plays into what I'm about to say a little bit more. I'm not all that enamored with the free agent wide receiver class, but there's some good bounce back candidates there, some younger guys that can be brought in probably on a low deal to kind of prove it. And then you go into the draft essentially, and you can just let the whole damn thing fall to you with a whole bunch of picks, especially on defense. Like you mentioned, defensive line and edge. This is a really cool class at both those spots that's really deep, and you can just let it fall to you and take the best guy to add to that group. So it's amazing how quickly they've really turned this thing around in the last few days, between like a whole bunch of needs. Like the mock drafts are going to change in the next couple of days, certainly. Right. And this is what I've been telling
10 minutes at this rate.
I've been telling people this for the last 2 weeks, right? Like if I had $1 for everyone who came to me today and said, but now they don't have any receivers except for JSN. Well, good thing they don't play tomorrow.
Yes.
Like have we all forgotten when the season starts? Right? We haven't even got to free agency in the draft yet, and people want to write that off already. Like, but anyway, love that you guys were able to hop on. Thanks. Sorry to those of you who are watching that got started a little bit late, because I'm an Arizona rookie and completely forgot that daylight savings time started. And so we're not an hour apart anymore. So appreciate you guys coming on. And now they're going to hop on over to the Hawk Zone Rundown channel that Bryce co-hosts with Ryan McMillan and is now affiliated with Mookie and Field Goals. So I'm going to stay on for a little bit, but maybe if you guys have 2 screens, you can watch both shows at the same time.
Yes.
It's like,
thanks, Dan.
Yep, absolutely, you guys. Thanks. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
All right, you guys, I want to get into a couple of things now. First of all, just to update, and then I'm going to get to your questions and comments here. I got a whole crap ton of them. Let's just update a couple things. Okay. Seahawks now with 10 draft picks, and Mookie said 5 of the top 100, 5 of the top 92. So they have their own native picks at 18 and 50. And then they have Pittsburgh's pick at 52. And then in the 3rd round, now they have 2 picks, their own native pick at 82. And then the pick that they got from Vegas through Detroit, according to Tankathon, number 92. Then they have their own native picks in the 4th and 5th round, 137 and 173. They have 2 picks in the 6th round, 187 from Chicago in the Darrell Taylor trade, and then a comp pick at 212. And then they have a 7th rounder at 236. I think that's accurate. I saw one other place today where it was listed that we have 3 6th rounders. But either way, in a draft that is considered weak at the top, well, not weak at the top. It's just that the top isn't as deep. Right? There's just a lack of blue chip players. We've heard that most teams have less than 10 true first round grades in this class. And yet from 10 to 100, the talent level is incredibly even and level, more so than many other years. And the classes that it's the strongest in: offensive line, defensive line, edge. Big needs for Seattle still, even to add to the defense with what they were able to bring back and what they have in place already. The wide receiver class is very interesting to me. It's not as good as the last 3, but those were like historically good. There's a lot of questions even about who wide receiver 1 is. Is it Tet McMillan? He didn't test at the combine. He's not an explosive athlete, but he's tall and long. And for a long time, he's been considered wide receiver 1. And in some mock drafts leading up to the process was top 10. He's fallen way down now, according to most boards. Emeka Ibuka, Luther Burden, right? Guys like Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State might be moving into the first round, or Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. It's an interesting class. I'll say it that way. There are all different shapes and sizes and styles. And so there is an opportunity for the Seahawks to be able to add at the wide receiver position. But I think if you're really going to get a player that can impact the roster as a rookie, you got to use one of those first 5 picks on a receiver. So I think we will see a guy on day 2, if not day 1. And so I want to get into that. And then I wanted to get into some, we touched on a lot of it with Bryce and Mookie. A lot of people have asked me the last couple of days or just flat out told me that they consider this a rebuild. I don't agree with that at all. First of all, they wouldn't allow it. Ownership wouldn't. There's a mandate that John has talked about a lot, including the first press conference after Pete was fired, to maintain their culture and win. Ownership's not interested in a tear down rebuild, a tanking for next year because the quarterback class is supposedly going to be better. How many times have we heard that? I just don't think that's the case. Now, anytime you move on from a good quarterback and a good receiver at the same time, especially, there is massive risk involved here. Huge risk. It may not work. It could all blow up and we could be looking at, a bottom 5 offense and a defense trying to carry it and trying to find their way. I just want to acknowledge that. It's a reality. It's always a risk. And it's what I've been warning about for the last 2 years. You might not like Geno, but if you move on from him, what is your answer? What's your plan? Right? And a lot of people have told me for months they would much rather switch from Geno Smith to Sam Darnold, save money, and get 7 years younger. I get it. And I think it could work out beautifully, but it could also fail spectacularly. And so it does create a little bit of angst, but also, and those of you that watch the show know, like, once I dealt with the emotional part of the team moving on from 2 players that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and again, have said over and over again, I wanted them to find a way to keep them both. Once it became clear that they didn't want to be here, or that they only wanted to be here at a number that I didn't think sounded reasonable, then, as I mentioned earlier, like, it kind of painted Schneider into a corner and almost made it easier for him to move on from those guys. And now that they're gone, and the reality that we're looking at is these draft picks and all this cap space, it does get pretty fun. Like, there were years, I would argue that most of the last 10 years, with the exception maybe of the year that Russell Wilson was traded, that March, April, May, or let me say February, March, April for the Seahawks was really boring. And so, as just kind of a analytical nerd that loves the team building aspect of all of this just as much as I do the stuff that happens on the field, this gets pretty exciting. It certainly provides a lot of opportunity for conversations and content to talk about this. I mentioned cap space as well as the draft picks. As it currently sits, the Seahawks have now, because over the cap is already updated after the DK Metcalf trade, although they move him into the unrestricted free agent column, which is kind of funny. This does not include the Ernest Jones deal or the Josh Jobe deal. And let's see, Jaron Reed, the details have, okay, so this includes Jaron Reed's deal, but not Ernest Jones. Seahawks have $68.4 million in cap space right now. Now, I'm not going to talk in terms of effective cap space because that doesn't matter right now. When you hear the term effective cap space, that means how much space is really available for new contracts above and beyond what you need to sign your draft picks, which is a higher number now because they have more picks, more higher picks. So that's going to eat into that a little bit. Your practice squad, injured reserve, and contingencies. John Schneider always talks about how we like to be a team that can make moves and has flexibility at the trade deadline. And so out of that $68.4 million, it's probably somewhere closer to $48 million in effective cap space. and then minus the Jones deal. But that first year cap hit's going to be low, guys. Only $15 million guaranteed for 3 years. That's going to be a low number. And then I think I've already seen, I think Jaron Reed's first year cap hit is like 3.5 million. So you still have over $40 million to spend in free agency. And the way they structure contracts, that is plenty to sign Sam Darnold, Will Fries, and another lineman if you want to. And I'll even make this argument. You can do that and still go get Jonathan Allen from the Washington Commanders if you want to, and add him to Byron Murphy and Jaron Reed and Leonard Williams. We know, I only say that because we know that Jonathan Allen was a target of the Seahawks 2 years ago before the trade deadline. They inquired about him at the same time they were looking into Leonard Williams. Allen wasn't made available, so they pivoted and got Williams. Are they still interested? If you think they wouldn't want to add another big salary to the defense, well, we know now it's being widely reported that they tried to get Max Crosby. They tried to trade Geno and DK to the Raiders for Max Crosby. They obviously were turned down, and then the Raiders turned around 2 days later and gave him that massive contract. So there is still that flexibility. And there's other moves that can be made. We still don't know about an Uchenna Nwosu restructure yet. At minimum, just with a simple bonus to salary to bonus restructure, they can save $3 or $4 million. But I think they're working on something more significant than that, so they can save a little bit more money even. And then there's Noah Fant. Last year of his 2-year deal, $13.4 million cap hit. Because it's the last year of his deal, you can't just convert salary to bonus without tacking on years, maybe avoid years. But they also have the flexibility of Clint Kubiak really likes Noah Fant and thinks he can work with him. And as much as he likes to run 12 and 13 personnel, you don't have to touch that deal. You can just leave it there at $13.4 million. Not my favorite move, but it's also the kind of thing that you can just wait on that too. And the Seahawks have typically done this. Good example of that is the last time DK got his extension. They waited until training camp, and that was the move they made to clear enough space to be able to sign the draft class and practice squad and all of that. So they could just hang on to the Noah Fant and Nwosu things until they absolutely have to. It's also possible, because they've done this before, that those two moves have already been sketched out, agreed upon, just haven't been executed yet. And then, as I mentioned earlier, next year, 2026 right now, the Seahawks have $180 million in cap space. That is tops in the league. So that just helps you even more to structure deals this year, put some bigger cap hits in year 2, which they've done successfully in the past, but also allows you to extend some of your younger players that you want to keep, which is something that is definitely a topic of conversation, but something that I think will come sort of after we see how free agency goes. Talked about the QB options with Bryce. I'll say this about, he did mention Justin Fields. Y'all know I'm not a Justin Fields fan. I just don't think he will ever develop into a dangerous downfield passer. However, if there's maybe some unexpected competition out there, maybe the Steelers get really aggressive and Darnold's price goes beyond what they are expecting it to be, and probably have every detailed indication of exactly what it's going to cost them based on conversations they had at the combine unofficially with his representatives. If that should skyrocket or get out of their range that they're comfortable with, if they are intent on being aggressive and drafting a quarterback this year, one that they feel really good, has upside as a high-end starter down the road, then maybe Fields does make some sense in another, because I don't think he has much of a market for a multi-year deal out there. He's probably looking at exactly what he did last year, or what Darnold did in Minnesota last year, that 1 year, $6 to $10 million ish type of prove it deal would make some sense, because first of all, there's sort of a connection with Kubiak. Kubiak was the offensive coordinator in Minnesota during Justin Fields' draft year, and the Vikings tried to trade up to get Fields. So certainly he was part of those discussions and evaluations in those draft meetings, and would have had to at some level sign off on, hey, yeah, I can work with that guy. So he's familiar with his game, but also the mobility factor, knowing that there's going to be, yet again, more changes to the offensive line And even though I think at least one of those changes is going to be a significant veteran that might not need as much time to get comfortable, there will be continuity issues. There will be a learning curve and a timeline before it all comes together. That's just the nature of offensive line play. You can't just plug one guy in and all of a sudden you're an all-pro unit. And so maybe having a guy back there that can really move around and get you out of some trouble does make some sense. The other one that I don't know has been talked about enough. I've got two more names, and then I'm going to get to all your comments and questions. I only have 543 of them to get to. I'm actually going to start with the newest ones first because many of them we might have already touched on. I'm not so sure if they should fail to land Darnold. At that point, I think drafting, being aggressive, maybe even moving up if they have to get the quarterback they really want. Let's just say it's Jackson Dart. I think Jackson Dart is absolutely everything that John Schneider likes in a quarterback. The way he carries himself, the way he speaks, the way he plays, the upside, the potential, the mobility, all of it. I think he's a John Schneider guy. And so if he feels like he has to move up above 18, maybe to secure him, and he thinks there's a real possibility of doing that, and he has conviction on that guy in the same way that he knew that he wanted Josh Allen and he wanted Patrick Mahomes, even though Russ was here during those times. If he has conviction on that guy, then a 1-year stopgap, I'm okay with. And so why are we not talking about the possibility, if they can't get Darnold, of Drew Lock, right? We know Schneider really liked him, that he chose the Denver deal in part because Russ wanted to go there, but also that there was reportedly a Philadelphia offer that may have included Jalen Hurts, and Schneider liked Lock better. And I know that doesn't look very good now, but I just think it speaks to the upside that he thought he saw in Lock. They wanted to bring him back last year. They didn't because the Giants offered him a chance to start. So they pivoted, traded for Sam Howell. I think if they should somehow fail to land Darnold, Lock might make some sense if you pair him with a quarterback that you think can play early in his career. The other one is this. Are we so sure that they've given up on Sam Howell? 25 years old still, 17 games as starter in the league, led the league in interceptions, we know, with a terrible offensive coordinator, a coordinator that did him no favors, dropped back, shotgun, no play action, 65% pass rate, poor offensive line, no attempt to deceive teams. Just once teams figured out that all they were going to do is just drop back and shotgun and throw it 50 times a game, they pinned their ears back and went after Howell and put a tremendous amount of pressure on him. He had the bad performance in the second half against Green Bay last year. Again, no favors. 14 straight pass plays, I think, that Grubb called for him when we were getting killed up front and not running the football. You can also make the argument, and I've had some people that really know their X's and O's better than I do, that the Ryan Grubb offense did not fit Sam Howell, but that he might be a really good fit in a Shanahan offense. Are we so sure that he's not going to factor into this? I'm just throwing that out there. I do want to talk about some top free agents that I think Seattle might be targeting. We've mentioned a few of them already, but I want to get into this because you guys have been really, really patient and racking up the comments and everything else. Let's start with starred comment. Felipe Nomad became a YouTube member. Thanks for doing that. Stay tuned. There are going to be, once free agency settles down a little bit, there are going to be some member-only live streams and other content that will be available, at least for the first few days, only to members before I make it visible to other viewers. So really appreciate you hopping on as a member. All right. You always know it's time for comments and questions when the glasses come on, right? Hearing a lot of this kind of stuff about the whole quarterback class. And so I do just want to put this up here. Marilyn Wilson. Marilyn, I'm sorry, I clicked on the wrong one. Marilyn says, no Drew Lock, please. Again, I think if there's on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably a 2 that it would happen. I'm just saying if they should strike out on Darnold for some reason, somebody else swoops in and offers them money they're not comfortable with, I think Lock comes into play there. I'd be flying an X-Wing. Thank you for the donation. Really appreciate it. For the record, I much prefer Darnold, but if we're taking a vet as a 1 or 2 year bridge, is there a case to be made for Cousins on a veteran minimum and spend the difference on upgrading trenches? Thank you for bringing that up. If Cousins is released by the Falcons, he is absolutely in play. The problem is that he hasn't been released yet. He's still on the Atlanta roster. And there's some indication that the Falcons are still trying to figure out a way to maybe get some value for him. Maybe you do the Brock Osweiler thing and you include like a day 2 draft pick for someone to take him off your hands, or you try to offset some of the money. I just don't know that there's a good fit for him out there other than Cleveland. But again, I think Cleveland is only interested because there's the obvious Kevin Stefanski connection there. I think they would only be interested if he's released too, because they're so hamstrung by the Deshaun Watson cap hit. Even though they restructured his deal, they just don't have a lot of money there. He may prefer to go to Cleveland in that case because of the familiarity with Stefanski, but he may prefer to come to Seattle because of the opportunity to win. He's 2 years removed now from Achilles surgery. That is a injury that's well known for players take a full season in order to get back to what they were physically before. I think that's the assumption people are making on maybe Aaron Rodgers having some value at this point too. But there is familiarity, obviously, with Cousins because Kubiak was there when he was there and he got one of his best years out of him. And that would be an easy transition. If Cousins is released, it would make sense. But it hasn't happened yet. And so I don't think they owe him his bonus until like the 15th. So they may play chicken for a couple of days, and the Seahawks can't afford to wait. If they have a chance to get Darnold for the number that they're comfortable with, they're going to make that move first and not wait. Oh, let's talk about this. Whoops. I keep clicking on the wrong one because keep getting them that sneak in under my mouse click. Drip Skylark says, I would take Rodgers, to be honest. I know the story leaked out today. I think it was Diana Rossini that said the Seahawks want to talk to Rodgers. To me, that screamed team leak to signal other veteran quarterbacks out there that might have an interest in playing for us, that Darnold specifically, that like, if you think this is a good fit, you need to take our number because we're also going to look at other options. I just cannot see, as much as John Schneider values character and the locker room, that he would want any part of Aaron Rodgers on this roster, because I don't see a situation at all where Aaron Rodgers goes into another locker room and doesn't expect to take it over. I just don't think that's going to happen. And there's Sean S. saying, I really hope we don't take Rodgers. Dominic Scott, thank you for the donation. Really appreciate it. Hey, Dan, do you see the Hawks taking that old approach of trading back to get another day 2 pick to get more bang for their buck? Big upside, in my opinion. No, because I think they're going to consider taking a quarterback at 18. If Jackson Dart's there at 18, I don't think they want to risk moving back and missing out on him. I think a situation like Darnold on a 3-year, like the Baker Mayfield deal, right, which is 3 years, low first-year cap hit, easy out after the second year where you can save. It's about 50-50 is kind of where it turns, where you save as much cap space as there would be dead money. You do something like that, you draft Jackson Dart as your quarterback in waiting. Shoot, you might even be able to get a day 3 pick for Sam Howell from somebody that wants, a young, solid backup with starter potential. So I don't see them trading back unless one of these other quarterbacks is their real target and they're confident they can get him. If Quinn Ewers is the guy that Schneider thinks is the guy to lead him, or Will Howard, and they're confident that they'll be there on day 2, then sure. Or even if they get indication, I'll give you another scenario. If Shadur Sanders experiences a significant drop and that pushes Dart down the board also, then maybe there's a situation where you could trade back and still get one of those quarterbacks. But I think that's going to be the priority. So, I mean, ask me again, right? After we see the Darnold deal, if they end up signing Darnold to a 5-year deal and there isn't an out until after the 3rd year, then maybe you take one of these developmental quarterbacks a little bit later. Maybe that even opens the door for a guy like Milroe that's going to take a lot of development, knowing that you don't have to play him for 2 or 3 years and you can just bank on the upside and take a shot at it, right? Mr. G, I want to address this because this is a very, very popular sentiment. I understand it. I get it. Dart is decent, but not worth trading multiple assets to move up to get him. The media will push him into the top 5. He's a very good college quarterback with pro traits. This is about projection. You cannot watch a college quarterback and go, If that's all he is, then I don't want him, because that's not all he is. He's 21 years old. He's got a ton of high-level starting experience in the SEC and playing against future pros every single game. He shows high-level pro traits. That's what you bank on. No guarantee he's going to make it. What's the bust rate on top 10 quarterbacks? 50-50. Like, it's high. It's always a risk. It's always a risk because it's based on projection. There is no such thing as a sure thing. Maybe the last sure thing that was drafted was Andrew Luck. Like, I'd have to go back and look now, but right, Trevor Lawrence was supposed to be the next great savior and can't miss quarterback prospect. Has he turned into that? I would argue no. They're all a risk. It's all about projection. But the traits that Dart does have, I think you can really dream on. And I think they're traits that John Schneider absolutely values. Which free agent quarterback would cost the least? LeBron. I mean, if Cousins is cut, it's the same thing as a Russell Wilson situation. He has so much guaranteed money coming to him from the Falcons still. He would sign a 1-year veteran minimum for what it's like $1.4 million. That's your cheapest route, unless you want to go with someone that would be really scary. This is interesting. Hawks Eye View. Dan would like to see the Hawks draft both Shuck and Hannigan. Thoughts? Drafting 2 quarterbacks is interesting. And John Schneider has history of doing this. Here, I want to go back and look at this because I referenced it the other day and I couldn't remember. I think it was like Braum and Flynn. But there was a year the Packers drafted 2 quarterbacks when they had Aaron Rodgers. Let's see. Let me find that year. Bear with me here for just a second. I want to go back. Oh, when was that? Probably 2007 or 8. Nope, here it is. Yep. I had the names right. They took Brian Braum out of Louisville. Ironic, because it could be Tyler Shuck could be a second-round pick. They took Brian Braum in the 2nd round and Matt Flynn in the 7th. That's a really interesting scenario, Hawks Eye, because I think Tyler Shuck ultimately goes in the 2nd round, and I think Seth Hannigan goes in the 7th round. That's interesting. Another guy I would consider taking later in the draft if he's available, even if you draft a guy up high, like even if you take Jackson Dart at 18 and sign Sam Darnold, I'd take a shot at Riley Leonard if he's still there in the 6th or 7th round. I think he has next level leadership capabilities and the ability to spot start. Maybe not a long-term starter, but a guy that would be an absolutely ideal backup for a very long time. And so after you're done with Darnold, you move on. You have Jackson Dart, Riley Leonard. That's a guy that I would consider drafting later too. Absolutely. Let me see here. That's another interesting combo. Will Howard and Milroe. Again, if you sign Sam Darnold to a 3-year or more deal, I think it does bring Jalen Milroe back into the picture. I saw a pretty significant step forward from him with the intermediate passing game between what I saw during Senior Bowl practices and what I saw on the combine. So he's clearly been in the lab doing work. The athletic upside is so dynamic that sky is the limit if he can click on the shorter stuff. And his timing, and it's all mechanical. It's all marrying his lower half to his upper body. He's an elite deep ball thrower, and he's an elite athlete. So if you have some stability at quarterback and you have Sam Howell as your backup next year, you could draft Jalen Milroe, depending on when. I wouldn't want to touch him until day 3. He'd be your 3rd quarterback. You could even have some packages for him, right? And then you bank on the upside, and if he's not developing after 2 years, maybe you consider a position switch or use him as a package player. But where I had been completely out on Milroe for the Seahawks, I think if you get a guy like Darnold on an established deal, it kind of brings him back into the picture. Thank you for the donation. Nick Coast, is there a scenario that this offense actually gets better with Justin Fields behind a solid offensive line in the Kubiak system? As I touched on a little bit ago, I have not been a Fields fan, but I could see it working in this system, especially initially, when there might be a little bit of a learning curve with the offensive line, learning to play together after some upgrades this offseason. I do think that there would be some value in that, obviously, all depending on the contract, the money, etc. I'd rather be flying an X-Wing. If we sign Rodgers, I'll still be a Seahawks fan, but I might be on loan to the Raiders for a season or two. I'm telling you, I'm going to be watching the Raiders hard this year. How can you not? It's going to be so much fun, right? I might even have to do like a weekly Raiders segment on Seahawks Forever. I might have to put that out in a poll. How many of you would like to see that? Would that be fun? Or maybe like have a regular segment where I have somebody come on that covers the Raiders and talk about him and just kind of keep up with that. Yeah. Here's the thing about Rodgers. Like, I despise the guy. I do think he's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Like, and you can make the argument that if you want to create a category all of its own called arm talent, maybe the best arm talent we've ever seen in the NFL. But who he is as a teammate and a person now, I just would want no part of it. And the thing I would be more upset. I'd be less upset about having to watch it as a Seahawks fan. Because again, look, from a purely physical standpoint, you can make the argument, the same one I made for Kirk Cousins, that if you get a couple more weapons for him and improve the offensive line, another year removed from an Achilles, he didn't play that bad last year. He really didn't. Like, as a stopgap, purely physical, I could see it. But man, as a fan, I wouldn't like it. But as a content creator, I would not want to talk about Aaron Rodgers every week. And I just wouldn't want the circus that comes along with it. And I don't think Schneider would either. I really don't think he's a legitimate option. Sorry, Cody. No. I'm glad someone brought this point up. As much as I was a proponent of keeping DK on the roster, really wanted him to be here for a third contract, even though third contracts for receivers like him typically don't age well. 5 years? Hell no. He'll be 32, 33 years old by the end of this contract. Like, some of the greatest receivers we've ever seen play fall off a cliff after they turn 30. And a guy that doesn't possess the nuances that some of the great receivers do of being able to really find spots and read the defensive back and run a complete route tree and create separation on his own. I just don't think his skill set's gonna age well. I really don't. I think the Seahawks got a little bit lucky here. You know, there were indications the day before that maybe a third round pick was the best they could hope for. But all it takes is one team. I talk about that a lot. And the Pittsburgh Steelers have been so desperate for so long, and they've been burned trying to get number one receivers, right? Chase Claypool had the great rookie year, and then he fell off a cliff and he had attitude issues. Deontay Johnson looked like a hit, and then he had attitude issues. George Pickens looked like a spectacular player, attitude issues. Like, they need a guy there, and they were willing to go out and make a move that was kind of uncharacteristic for them to get him. They got lucky on both these fronts. I do believe everything that Mike McDonald, John Schneider said. As much as there's some cynics out there who said, oh, you can never believe these guys, they were probably thinking this all along. I believe that they considered Geno and DK to be significant parts of the team in 2025 and beyond, and that their offseason plan revolved around keeping both of them. And that the only reason that they both are now on other rosters is because the one guy that would be interested in trading for Geno and giving him what he wanted was Pete Carroll. And that was the only place where he had an opportunity to get a job this year. I thought he was done in the league. I really did. And then the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers were that one team that was desperate enough and felt like they had enough else in place, offensive line, running philosophy, great defense. They don't have a quarterback yet, which is funny because DK said one of the things he wanted was a more stable quarterback situation. Well, he literally just went to a team that has 0 quarterbacks on their roster. I would not have paid him that contract. And so to get a second round pick back, to get a pick back that's higher than the pick you used to acquire him in the first place, even knowing that the team acquiring him had to pay that much money, is, to me, it's a coup. And I also think a third round pick was about the most you were going to expect for a 35-year-old quarterback with some inconsistencies who also was demanding a new contract. So I think John did as well as he could here. Perfect segue. Craig Lyons. Free agency and the NFL draft are going to be fire this year. Let me get to my list of guys that I think are probably high on their free agency board that make a lot of sense. The obvious ones. Let's start with the interior offensive line. Drew Dahlman's the guy everybody wants. And I know that Bryce or Mookie said that they don't think that Dahlman is realistic. And it's probably because they've heard that the Chicago Bears are making him a priority too, even after trading for Joe Tooney and Jonah Jackson. They've got the money, they can spend it. I don't know. I think Schneider's going to give it a shot. And you know what his sales pitch is going to be? Hey, Drew, we just locked up Sam Darnold as our starting quarterback. We have one of the best, brightest young head coaches in the league who has put together a potentially dominating defense. We're a young roster that has tons of cap space the next couple of years. We see you as the anchor point in our offense, and we need a guy like you to run this offense. And oh, by the way, you're a West Coast guy. If the Seahawks were to offer the same amount of money as Chicago Bears, and I don't know, does Illinois have a state income tax? Do you want to go play in Chicago in that kind of weather for a team that's under complete transition with a young quarterback who's been erratic? Like, I get it. I get the Ben Johnson appeal and I get the Caleb Williams appeal, and they've got weapons there. I understand it. Or do you want to come home and play on the West Coast? Maybe it's not so much a case of offering more money or a higher average annual value, but maybe going longer in length than they're used to. Seahawks love their third round or their 3-year contracts, right? Maybe you have to offer Drew Dalman a 5-year deal. Maybe you have to give him kind of that Robert Hunt deal, 5 years, $100 million. Maybe you have to go a little bit farther to get that guy if he truly is that elite center that Clint Kubiak says he wants in his offense. Remember, Clint Kubiak puts protection responsibilities on the center, not the quarterback. Takes a lot off the quarterback's plate, just lets him play more free and easy, and he doesn't have to worry about that kind of stuff. That's my sales pitch, right? If you don't land him, you might be able to pivot to Josh Myers, Green Bay, same age. A guy who was a 4th-round pick out of Ohio State his draft year 4 years ago, a guy that I scouted heavily coming out that year, liked him. He's not as dynamic of an athlete as Drew Dahlman, but his PFF grades in zone runs is very, very good. And he would cost less. He might be a potential possibility. But the guy that I would go at, if I'm signing a center in free agency and I miss out on Dahlman, it's Ryan Kelly. Indianapolis seems like they're ready to move on from him, and they seem to acknowledge that they're going to lose Will Fries, although there's a chance they could bring him back. Ryan Kelly's 32 years old now. He's had some injury issues, but if he's healthy, if the Seahawks are satisfied with his medicals, talk about, like, I don't know, is he a Hall of Famer? Like, he's been one of the best centers in the league for 10 years, and a guy that can call all those protections and help mentor a couple of younger guards. Presumably, if you have to spend a bunch of money to get Ryan Kelly here, he can help mentor Jalen Sundell to maybe take up the mantle after he leaves and be the pivot of the future. Jalen Sundell's a guy I'm really high on. He's got an elite athletic profile, played well in his slight opportunity against Green Bay last year. And every time I see him, he looks good. Like, maybe that's the move. You get Ryan Kelly on a 2-year deal, maybe give him some money for, the end of his career, give him a nice little signing bonus up front, tack on a couple void years. And then maybe you sign another kind of functional guard as a veteran to go along with what I would presume then would be a pretty high draft pick at the position as we move forward. So I think Ryan Kelly is in play there. Will Fries has been called. Rob Staten, who I'm having on tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. Actually having him on very late tonight so that we can do it on London time for him. He's been saying Will Fries is the perfect wide zone scheme run blocking guard. 27 years old, coming off an injury, might keep his price down a little bit, but I've also seen reports that he's going to get a bag. It's interesting, and I can't wait to talk to Rob about this, because he says he's a perfect fit in a wide zone scheme, but I looked up his pro day testing results and they were terrible. They did not indicate a good athlete. They kind of looked like Tyler Booker type testing numbers. So can't wait to talk to Rob about that. Certainly he figures in. And then Patrick McCarry from Baltimore is another guy. The thing that really appeals to me about him, he's 27, 28 years old. He's never really been a full-time starter, but when he has played, he's played well. And he can play all 5 positions. He's literally played all 5 positions. I would see him, though, as a swing tackle. He can play left tackle or right tackle. And you have to have a guy like that on your roster, right? Even if Abe Lucas is 100% healthy, which it looks like he is, and that's great. Charles Cross and those guys play a whole season together like they did it as rookies. you got to have a guy on the roster that can play both sides. It's just, it's to me, it's the best way to build your roster. Instead of some guys can play left side only, some guys right side only. So it's a real nice luxury to have. We had that in Stone Forsyth, but he just didn't play well enough. So he's not going to be back. We tried to acquire that in George Fant, but the knees wouldn't cooperate, or the knee. I think Macari's a guy that would make a ton of sense. Although if you can't offer him a starting job, he may decide to go elsewhere. So you might have to sign him and tell him that he's going to compete at guard. And then ultimately you might end up being your swing tackle. On defense, some interesting guys. I've talked about Bobby Brown from the Rams before. He's 25 years old, considered one of the best young run stuffers in the league. Only has made $4 million in his career as a fourth rounder. So he hasn't been paid yet, but it doesn't sound like there's going to be a huge market for him. And even going back to the Rams, while I'm sure they'd love to have him, they tweeted something the other day showing his PFF run blocking grade and talking about what a great run blocker he is. And Bobby Brown replied to it. And maybe this is a little indication of attitude that maybe is something the Seahawks are wary of, but he had a tone where he wasn't real happy with that tweet because he thought it was implying that he couldn't rush the passer. And he said something along the lines of, you don't ever let me do that. You don't let me play every down. Otherwise you'd see it. So he may be looking to move on. And that's a guy that's, hasn't quite hit the physical prime of his career yet, that could really be a great rotational defensive tackle with some pass rushing upside, but a guy that could really help stuff the run. Actually had his best year with the Rams last year, 44 tackles and a 42% snap share. How about a guy like, if you're just looking for a rotational depth along the defensive line, it's not going to cost you a lot. How about Jerry Tillery, originally drafted by the Chargers, right? Spent last year with the Vikings. The reason I bring him up is because in 2019, remember that year? That was the LJ Collier year when the Seahawks desperately needed an edge because they had just traded Frank Clark, and they kept trading down in that draft. And that draft had all sorts of really cool edge players in it. Rashawn Gary, Josh Sweat. Those are two guys that it sounded like, it was Montez Sweat. I think it was Montez Sweat. And we kept trading down and then missing out on those guys. Jerry Tillery was one of them. And there were reports that he was the target and that we missed out on him by getting too cute and trading down and had to settle for LJ Collier. Can he still play? Do they still feel highly about him? Maybe he's a guy that could come in. How about Chase Young? Right? If you want to add someone to that edge rotation, I don't know what kind of market he's going to have. 14 sacks the last 2 years in New Orleans. Only a $3.4 million cap hit last year. Doesn't seem to be the same player that he was before the really bad knee injury 4 years ago. Not as dynamic or explosive. But look at the success Mike McDonald had in kind of resurrecting edge players' careers in Baltimore with both Kyle Van Noy and Jadeveon Clowney, right? If Young's affordable, he could fit into that. I do think Jonathan Allen might be in play, as I said earlier. Then there's the fullbacks. Adam Prentice, 27 years old, was the fullback on the New Orleans roster last year. He's an unrestricted free agent. He'd be cheap. I think he played for $1.2 million last year. Or Patrick Richard, who's older, but he would cost more, from the Baltimore Ravens. Certainly McDonald knows him well during his time there. Former lineman, right? 260-pound, much bigger guy, different guy than Prentice. Prentice built more like a running back. And then at receiver, right? If you want to add someone to the receiving room, which they're certainly going to want to in free agency before the draft, I don't want to play at the top of the receiver market because I don't like it. There's guys up there that are probably going to get paid in this market that I really don't want to pay. But Marquez Valdez-Scantling makes all the sense in the world. He's kind of kicked around since finishing his rookie deal with Green Bay. He's been on 4 teams now in the last couple of years. He's 31 years old now. He played for the veteran minimum last year, joined the Saints second half of the season after Rashawn Shaheed got hurt, and scored 4 touchdowns, was probably their best receiver down the stretch. Olave was a little banged up as well. I think he's a guy that wouldn't cost you a lot of money, kind of fits that same skill set as DK, but he's a little bit more complete of a route runner. Guy like Josh Reynolds, who just produces everywhere he goes, just a really steady veteran, isn't going to cost you a huge bag. I think those are just a couple of names. And then you got your bounce back candidates, right? Your guys like Rondale Moore, some of those smaller slot type guys that you could add to the mix. And then you're definitely going to be hunting outside guys in the draft if you were to do something like that. So those are just some of the free agents that I wanted to kind of throw out there. Well, let's do this, you guys, because hold on here. I would now like to welcome into the show Michael Thompson, my old friend from formerly of 12th Man Rising, now affiliated with Field Goals, one of the best draft analysts that I know out there. Michael, let me just ask you the question that I asked Bryce and Mookie earlier, and that I would ask any fan that I'm talking with as well. Like, is your head spinning for the last 72 hours? What do you make of everything that's happened over the last few days?
Wild. Just like absolutely insane. This is, I wrote about it for Field Goals the other day. Like, this is John Schneider and even to an extent Mike McDonald's defining moment with the Seahawks, right? Like, this is John's first time without Pete, which even then, even without Pete still finds a way to be a part of this crazy 72-hour period. But this is John putting together his team for the first time without Pete's help. This is his blueprint, for better or worse. This is on him, and this is what he's going with. And he doesn't want to pay DK Metcalf what DK wants. Maybe DK doesn't want to be in Seattle. Same conversation with Geno Smith, up to a price.
Yeah.
It sounds more and more like it might be more about DK and Geno than John. And so he's not waiting around. He's pivoting, and he's pivoting very quick. And man, tomorrow morning is going to be a day of reckoning for the 12th man fans if John doesn't do something very quick.
Well, how much do you think he will do? Right. We talked about a little bit earlier how quickly he just talked about on his radio show a few days ago, how these next 4, 5, 6 days, you have to be able to pivot when things happen that you don't expect. And then literally hours after that, the DK news came out, the Geno deal, and he had to pivot. And I think I've made the argument already that I think he got as good of value in both those moves as you could expect, given those players' age and production and how much money that you were going to need to pay them as the acquiring team. Now that that's all been done, and now that essentially all 11 starters on defense are in place, not just for 2025, but beyond, like you talk about building a foundation of a defense, like that defense is locked in for a couple of years, and you get to add to it in a very good front seven draft. And so now you really do get to just focus on the biggest weaknesses on the roster, which now includes quarterback, obviously, but that offensive line, they got all the money to do it. We talked about this before we hopped on. $68 million in cap space as we sit here today. That does not include the Josh Jobe or the Ernest Jones deal yet, and $180 million available next year, which is tops in the league. How aggressive is John Schneider going to be tomorrow?
I think this will be the most aggressive we've seen Seattle since probably the Sidney Rice, Zach Miller year. I believe that was in 2011. Kind of setting the stage where they felt very similar. Hey, we've got a defense that we think we're building something special, and you saw that today. Like Reed and Jones, they wanted to be here despite all the crap we've heard about culture stuff in the last 24 hours, and that's fine. But I think we saw very quickly those are two guys that are going to be captains and be part of this franchise for the next few years, for better or worse, and they wanted to be here. And to get them at the deals we got them at is amazing, because you're locking up guys that are good players that you're adding and you're keeping on a team that I believe finished last year in 12th in scoring defense. And I think we all think that's going to be probably even better this year, as long as the offense, isn't one of the worst in the league. But thank you, Craig. But like, there is, what is it, fifth in the league in cap space, I believe, going into tomorrow morning. Fifth or sixth is what I saw. That doesn't include Uchenna Nwosu, very likely getting his deal restructured.
Yeah.
So
and they haven't touched Noah Fant. They haven't touched Noah Fant's deal. That's 13.4 right there.
There is no way, there's no reason why you can't be over $80 million, which again, nobody's going to touch the Patriots, and it's going to be tough to touch the Chargers. But at the same time, you're right in that realm, which really helps you a lot with trying to get the guys that everybody wants. I think there's a good chance that a lot of people that the fans want is also who the Seahawks want. We saw that today with Brady Henderson talking about fries. Yeah. Dahlman, he's the ball. We'll see what ends up happening. I think you're gonna have to go to 18, 19, maybe even 20 million to get him.
Yeah.
But I think John's not dumb, right? Like he has decided to pivot. I think a lot of this stuff was figured out probably last week at the combine. It was just kind of setting up those final pieces of, hey, what happens if, hey, I don't think that conversation probably went so good with Geno Smith, or, where are we looking at? How do we pivot? And so I think some of this has been talked about, and hopefully that gives them enough time to be aggressive and to go look at, because you and I have talked about it. There's a few players in this free agency, which is known as a very mediocre class at best. I still think there is a path. And again, it is a more narrow path to success this year than if you would have just ran it back. Yeah. Knowing the pros and cons with that. But I think there is a path, and there are some guys that, because Seattle has a third place schedule, because the NFC West is in a state of, I don't want to say flux, but it's definitely kind of on shaky ground right now. And you got the NFC West schedule, or NFC South schedule, and the AFC South schedule. You can be a 9-win team and look up and you've got 12 wins. Like, this is not the year where you would necessarily want to blow it up, but John understands I need to do something, because the guys that are pretty good, if not, very good, but aren't great, don't want to be here. I'm not going to overpay to keep them. So he's moving forward, and there's a path to take, and we'll see how it works out.
And again, it makes sense that these moves came on the offensive side of the ball. Like these are guys that were connected with Pete Carroll, but also, we have a defensive head coach and a guy that, every single defensive player on the Seahawks roster that you talk to just raves about this guy. They'll call him, JSN always likes to call him a nerd. I know he's an offensive guy, but they talk about how smart he is and how much they love the scheme and how much they love that he puts them in a position to be able to make plays. And, defensive players, if they're going to fly around and sacrifice their bodies and put themselves on the line, like, they want to enjoy the guy they're doing it for. And those are the guys that typically have success long-term as DCs or head coaches. And clearly, like, I still can't believe that the Ernest Jones deal is only $15 million guaranteed. Like, that just blows me away.
Especially when today, 2 linebackers that, I'm not going to say they're worlds better than Ernest. I would probably say they're probably viewed by the league a little bit better or a little bit higher ranked than Ernest Jones. I think the Ernest Jones we saw once he got to Seattle was a top 10 linebacker in the NFL. And at best, he's going to be the 10th highest paid linebacker in football. Like, that, it's just insane. And you got him for 3 years. You didn't have to extend him for 4 or 5 years. Like, just I'm very surprised, but it's the most pleasant way. And I know a lot of people are still down in the dumps about Geno, and a lot of people are in the dumps about DK. But seeing those 2 deals makes me very excited for which direction the franchise is going, if this is how they're going to be able to do business. You had 2 guys that didn't want to be in Seattle, and you got 2 top 100 picks, including a top 52 pick, which I know some people are upset. Oh, I wanted in the 30s. I wanted in the 40s. Like, it was going to be really hard to get that. This is the absolute lowest value right now that DK Metcalf is probably at, unfortunately, which is never when you want to trade someone. But to get a number 52 pick is nice. To get a number 92 pick for a quarterback that literally had one other team that wanted him, that's pretty nice. And I don't have the facts to back that up, but I think it's pretty well known. Geno was kind of boxed in to stay in Seattle if it wasn't for Pete Carroll being his best bud.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so Seattle was able to get something out of it. And now, again, I wrote it in my article, this is boom or bust, but it's the opportunity, right? If this goes wrong, then you know what? John probably loses his job. And after 15 seasons, it's probably time to go in a different direction. And next year is the kind of class that if you're going to have a bad year, I don't want to tank. Tanking doesn't work. But like, if you're going to have a bad year because it didn't work out, next year's a great year to have a top 10 pick.
Absolutely. And you and I were texting a lot today, and if it goes badly, I think, well, I'll just use your words. It's the perfect timing, because you do have, and I know we say this every year and it's a slippery slope, and you got to be careful. You can't ever bank on this, but it would appear, as we see it here today, that next year's quarterback class is potentially much more dynamic and a little bit more certain, potentially at the top, with a bunch of options, but also the free agent class next year, as you mentioned, like guys like Trey Hendrickson and potentially Micah Parsons. Now that Garrett got his big deal and Crosby got his big deal, and Dallas might, they don't like handing those out, and they might have waited too long. There's just a bunch of examples of why next year might be a really good year to have a higher pick and a bunch of cap space, which right now the Seahawks do. let me ask you this, because I mean, you cover everything, but I think when you and I first started talking and communicating,
When I first started bugging you, let's put it right.
it was about quarterbacks, and that was
Yep.
kind of your niche and sort of your favorite focal point and a passion of yours. And I always defer to you on quarterback rankings. Is how, if indeed that's the move, assuming they're able to improve the offensive line. Okay, let's just kind of set that to the side. Are you like, what are your feelings on Sam Darnold going from Geno Smith, just purely talent wise and upside wise, to go from Geno Smith to Sam Darnold, if that's a move?
I'm pretty open to it. If not, I think there's a good chance that works out really well, right? Like, this is not. Let's be clear. I do not think that Sam Darnold is going to be, the next franchise quarterback that's going to be here for 10 years. If he does, that's fantastic, right? Like, what Tampa Bay got with Baker Mayfield through 2 years has been awesome, right? Like, they signed him to a deal that worked out for Baker, but also really worked out for the Buccaneers, and it gave them a chance to win back-to-back division titles. And Tampa Bay is probably the favorite to win the NFC South again this year. And I think Sam Darnold's very much in that same mold. One of the most highly touted prospects, right? Had amazing early success at USC. And then the situation around him was so bad, he could only lift it up so much. You know very well, he really struggled when he played the Cougars down in Pullman. And that was really a year where I think they were preseason number 2. And I don't even know if they finished the year ranked. Still, talent. Becomes the number 3 pick, gets upset by Baker Mayfield for the number 1 pick, goes to the Jets. Other than Cleveland, right? Maybe the Jets is the worst environment and worst franchise to get drafted to, despite, the New York market and stuff.
Yeah.
We got to the point where Sam Darnold was seeing ghosts, and he got caught on Monday Night Football saying that, and that pretty much ended his career, the first half of his career.
Yeah,
goes to Carolina. Right. Was awful. Right. And he goes to the right situation where he gets to sit for a year, get healthy, relax, learn from the San Francisco 49ers, who was the passing coordinator during their Super Bowl season, Clint Kubiak. And so then goes to Minnesota. McCarthy gets hurt in preseason. And all of a sudden, you put Sam Darnold, a very talented player that's never had the right situation, with the right coach, the right offensive weapons, and even with a shaky offensive line, he finally got into the right situation, and they won 14 games.
Yeah.
Like, 14 games. The Seahawks have never won 14 games in the regular season. He was a win away from being the number 1 seed. And you know what? The pumpkin, however you want to say it, the clock struck midnight in that Sunday Night Football game to end the year. And then the clock struck midnight in Phoenix when they lost to the Rams in that playoff game. And I feel like everyone's just discounting the 16 games before that. Seahawk fans literally saw him lead a game-winning drive against the Seahawks in Seattle, right? Making an incredible throw. One of the 10 best throws of the entire season to win the game. The talent is there. He has experience with so many guys on the offensive line or in the offensive coaching staff. It won't matter if he doesn't have a good offensive line. It won't matter if they can figure out to get him a couple more weapons or develop a good running game. But if you can go into free agency and get him on a Baker Mayfield deal, then that allows you to be super aggressive in free agency. Go get him that center that Kubiak wants. Go get a guard. Draft somebody with 2 of your first 3 picks. Like, you can build something to where it is very reasonable for Sam Darnold to have a better year than Geno Smith. And I know that's blasphemy to a lot of people, but like, I believe, and I might be the minority here, but I believe Sam Darnold's ceiling is higher than Geno Smith's ceiling. I think they're very similar players, but we saw what happens when you give Sam a little bit more than average, and he was able to make it work. And we've seen that with Geno as well. Again, you're splitting hairs, but if I can save $5 million, $8 million more with Sam Darnold and can go get another player rather than pay Geno, who doesn't want to be here, it's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah. And I'm seeing a lot of this. I'm going to put a couple of these comments up on the board because I get it. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge the Snail, who's a member, has been a member for 2 months. Thank you for that. Gardner Minshew or bust. I mean, I'm wearing the WSU shirt, right? And look, I know he's probably not 100% serious on this. If I was going to say there's no other options. No, if their plan was draft a guy and then just sign a bridge, right, kind of the typical combination, then Minshew would make sense. That's not the mandate from ownership. I don't think they would go for that. They want to still try to win in 2025, and so I think they're going to shoot higher for that. But that being said, Gardner Minshew in a Seahawks uniform would be a ton of fun. I got this from Big Soldier. Sam Darnold, not a great fit. He had a good O-line, best defense, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. I've heard a lot of this. This is a very popular sentiment, right? We've already talked about how we believe, and I've been saying this for 2 months, that John Schneider is going to go out and aggressively address the offensive line, both in a combination of free agency, the draft, and what they have on hand, because people seem to want to give up on all of the picks that we've made on the offensive line over the last 2 years. There is the connection with Clint Kubiak, and they are going to address those things. This falls under the category for me of, and I said this to Mookie and Bryce earlier, good thing the Seahawks don't play tomorrow, right? There's a lot that can be done between now and then. But then we get someone like Awesome O says it's not blasphemy. Sam Darnold is better than Geno Smith. It's kind of all over the place. Chicken God, Vikings had a number 9 ranked offensive line. I mean, I get all that, right? I do see the ceiling, but I also think it's only going to be one part of a 2-part plan. Whereas before the Geno Smith trade was made, when I thought he was going to be the starter in 2025 and beyond, I still thought John was going to take a quarterback in this draft. And I had been campaigning openly for the fact that he needed to this year and moving forward until they find the right guy. As soon as they traded Geno, I think it changed the equation. And now, even if it's Darnold, even on a fairly long-term deal, like let's just say it's the Baker Mayfield deal, right? For 3 years with a pretty easy out after 1, a real easy out after 2, if they want to. Now I think you're also looking to draft a quarterback high, maybe even with the first-round pick.
Absolutely. And for, some of the fans of your show might even be a little too young to remember, but there's definitely some shades of Matt Flynn here, right? Like where you go get a quarterback. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so Sam Howell is Tavares Jackson, right? Sam Darnold would be Matt Flynn. And then potentially, just for example, at 18, Jackson Dart could be Russell Wilson.
No, exactly. Like what Matt Flynn did in his one game. I believe he threw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns in a meaningless game, and going in to the offseason. Yeah, it was.
Wasn't it 6 touchdowns?
Oh, right. Like it's the equivalent in one game of what Sam Darnold just did over the course of the season. And Sam Darnold is a way more talented player than Matt Flynn. But there is that scenario where it's like, hey, we're going to sign you to a 3-year deal that we can easily get out of after 2, and you're not even going to really hurt us, until that 3rd year anyways, and we can get rid of you. But yeah, this definitely changes that dynamic. And on the John Schneider show this week with Bob Stelton, he talked about it. He said there was a couple of quarterbacks that, I don't know if he said threw really well or really impressed us. He said one of those 2 things. And so we had to go back to the drawing board, and we had to reevaluate before we go and visit them. Right. And so a couple, what is that? Is that 2? Is that 4? Everyone talks about, who played well who threw out the combine, who didn't. But I definitely think that puts at pick 18, you're in that crosshair where at pick 18, you're probably going to have that decision, because I think there's a real shot, if not even a more than 50% shot, that Shadur Sanders and Jackson Dart are both going to be there. And I know a lot of people don't want to even have that conversation about Sanders, but I'm just saying that's someone that you didn't think was going to be there. And if things are going in a way, again, it feels very like the NBA, where a player will drop himself out of the combine and every single drill once he gets a promise from a team. It kind of feels like Shadur has a promise from someone. So I don't think he'll make it to 18, but the consensus is that he is going to be in that position to fall if the Jets don't take him at 7. Yeah. And so that is something you just have to have that conversation. Hey, how does Shadur Sanders play? We've already seen him in colder weather in Colorado, and he played really well. How does he look in Seattle? How does he look in the Kubiak scheme? I've seen a lot of people talk about, Shadur Sanders is a perfect fit in the Sean McVay scheme. It's very similar style and setup. I'm not saying, I'm just saying that it's someone to look at. Jackson Dart. And that's the other thing about this draft. I don't think there is a better draft. Again, I think teams like this draft more than the fans do, because we didn't really watch that star quarterback. We didn't have, that stud we didn't get to watch Cam Ward in the playoffs. We didn't get to watch Jackson Dart in the playoffs. We didn't get to watch Jalen Miller in the playoffs. Quinn Ewers was not healthy in the playoffs. The only guy that really played well in the college football playoffs was Will Howard, right? And Riley Leonard to an extent with his legs. And so you go into this draft with this Shanahan, Kubiak, McVay style scheme. Dart fits that. Quinn Ewers fits that. Will Howard fits that. Shedeur Sanders might fit that. Like there is a definite feel at 18 or maybe even a little bit later that there is a fit for one of these guys. And I think absolutely either we're taking a quarterback at 18 or we're going to use pick 50 and 52 and probably trade up to get into the 30s and probably take a guy, which if you're going to get into the 30s, and I know I've had some pushback on this. If you're going to go that far, you might as well get back into 32 to get that extra fifth year. And I know a lot of people think that's an overrated thing,
right?
But it's also good to have that, right? So that's kind of where I'm at. I think 100% we're going to see a quarterback taken by Seattle, in my opinion, and within the first 40 picks.
Just for the record, January 1st, 2012, Flynn started the final game of the season for the Packers against the Lions. Was that the year the Lions went winless?
Probably.
Threw for 480 yards, 6 touchdowns, and a 45-4, but they still gave up 41 points. That's crazy. Yeah, just wanted to follow up on that. Yeah, to your point, I'll even say this, and the more that I study these quarterbacks, and especially after the combine and the way that he interviewed and everything else, I just think Jackson Dart exemplifies everything John Schneider loves in a quarterback and makes all the sense in the world. So I'm going to keep using him as this example.
Mm-hmm.
When the Seahawks traded Russell Wilson and got all those picks and even some players in return, I think, and I'm not on an island with this, I think it was universally assumed that he fully expected to use some of that draft capital to find the next quarterback, and that he just expected that to happen. And if you go back and you break down the next 2 years, the draft just never fell their way. And they would have had to reach if they wanted to take a guy. We entered into some of those drafts thinking players are going to be available, but like the best example of how it didn't work out is when we had the 5th pick and the guys that they liked all went 1, 2, and 4, right? Or 1, 3. Yeah. 1, 2, and 4. And thank goodness it wasn't Anthony Richardson now with how things have turned out. That just shows you the volatility and the risk of drafting that position. But I think Dart exemplifies everything: tilt the room, personality, competitiveness, all the pro style traits, everything else. Because he missed out those 2 years after the Russ trade, if that's what he decides, if he goes into this draft and he has as much conviction about Jackson Dart as he did about Russ, where he said he didn't want to get out of that draft without him, where he did about Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, where he considered figuring out a way to draft those guys, even though Russ was in the prime of his career at the time. If he has that kind of conviction about Dart, he may not want to take a chance, and he may feel like he has to be a little bit aggressive and move up a little bit in order to secure him. And now they have the draft capital to do that if they want to, and still be able to address the rest of their needs.
Yeah. So if you look at the NFL draft trade value chart, there's a lot of different sites you can go look at that. But pick 50 and 52, if you were to trade that, the equivalent, if you were to use both picks, that would get you up to number 22 in the first round. So that is that value. And that's why I think if you want to package those, I think you can easily get into the 30s or late 20s. I'm looking at Detroit, Washington, even Kansas City or the Eagles. If they feel like a lot of people do, that pick 25 to 75 is not that far apart this year because the middle is so good, they might be interested. Sure, yeah, we'll give up 28, 29, 30 if you give me some combination of 50 and 52. I'm sure they would have to give something back as well to make it right. But like that's I'm not against going after Dart. Is he my number one quarterback? No, but I would be very interested in his skill set and stuff. And I think you're right. He definitely fits the tilting of the room, the personality, the traits that I definitely think that John will be after. But man, it would just be really nice to go and get someone at 18, best player available, and then get someone if you can still get him at 25. But like you said, and I know Rob Staten has talked about this, the quarterbacks might not be there by 50.
Right. Right. I do think, though, if you're talking about that clump of like Will Howard, Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers, right, it kind of all bunched together there, I think one of them will be there at 50. And I just keep using that as an example because I think people need to be prepared for that possibility. I agree. As a fan, especially, again, so many moving parts here that all sort of fit together between free agency and the draft, right? If Darnold's the pick, then you can be a little bit more patient, I think, on the quarterback thing. And then maybe you take like the highest impact defensive front five stud that's going to help just wreak some havoc. Or potentially at 18, you might have a shot to take wide receiver 1, very similar to the year when JSN was the first wide receiver taken at 20. Like the way this draft seems to be falling, seriously, every wide receiver might still be on the board by 18. That might make a lot of sense just from a value and talent perspective. And then you circle back around and now you have extra 2s and extra 3s. You can take a shot on a Quinn Ewers knowing he's not going to have to play for a couple of seasons. It does change the equation. And that is my preference. I just think John might be thinking about it in a different way. And when he falls in love with the guy, sometimes to a fault, he'll take him, right? Rashad.
Right. I definitely agree. And I think one of the things that speaks to your point is it really does feel like his job's on the line, right? If they win 4, 5, 6 games, there's a chance he doesn't survive this. And so how do you do that? One, you clear the books, you get everybody that you want to get in free agency. So I might be in the minority here, but I think we're going to see John spend in a way we have not seen before. I think tomorrow is going to be, I think the next 72 hours, again, keep harping it, is the defining moment of this, how we're going to end our vision of John Schneider. Is this the guy that's going to earn his name up in the Ring of Honor? He might already locked it up with a Super Bowl win, but like, is he going to cement that in the next 2 or 3 years by getting us to another NFC Championship and Super Bowl? You can do that with $80 million to spend. Go be the highest bidder. Make Drew Dahlman say no. Make Will Fry say no. Make Jonathan Allen say no, right? There's a lot of bad eggs in free agency. There's also a lot of guys that are good fits and can help make this team good. Go make Sam Darnold say no to everything that would be a very comfortable fit out on the West Coast with people that he's been a part of. It's not just Kubiak. You got other guys on the coaching staff that he's been a part of and stuff. And I think there's a sales pitch there, even without, a loaded wide receiver room yet. And then the other part for John is if you take a quarterback early, I'm not saying this is like the best reason, but it buys you a little bit of time. Because if you get Sam Darnold and you draft a quarterback at 18, guess who just did that and almost made the playoffs despite it not working out? The Atlanta Falcons.
Right.
Okay. And the Atlanta Falcons we're talking about the fit and the years and it just not fitting. If the Atlanta Falcons act normal and don't draft a quarterback at 9 after paying Kirk Cousins so much money, there's a good chance Michael Penix or Bo Nix falls to Seattle last year. Not saying we would have taken him, but you're just in that situation where it would have been very hard for the public on John if he didn't take a UW or an Oregon quarterback. And so I just think there's a few avenues here where, hey, I've got the most money I've ever had to spend. My defense is, like, knock on wood, is set. Like, I got a top 10, probably the top 8 defense, and that schedule is going to allow me to have a really good really good defense, most likely. I just need a veteran to not screw it up, and then I need a quarterback so then I can tell the public, tell ownership, well, I'm just waiting until Dart is ready. Oh, I'm just waiting until Will Howard's ready or Quinn Ewers is ready. And Sam Darnold is the same guy that's going to win us 8 to 12 games on a, that kind of that in between, that middle ground. And who knows, maybe we win a playoff game or win a division and get a home playoff game. That's more money for ownership. Like, this is also a business. It's a sales pitch. And that's what Sean is trying to do right now. And he wants to go down with his guys, or he wants to win with his guys. Yeah.
I did want to put this comment on the screen because I do think it represents a pretty significant portion of the fan base, how they're feeling today. Right. I've seen this type of comment a lot today. From Coda Dad. Dan, they haven't turned the team around. They gutted it. Your positive spin when the team has few good options at QB and Dahlman looks to be going to the Bears. The new picks are low second and third. Ugh. Okay. I get it. And I understand the sentiment. I really, really do. But first of all, Schneider was really given no choice. Your quarterback doesn't want to be here. Your star wide receiver doesn't want to be here. I don't want him in the locker room. Like, that's just the way of the modern sports athlete. Like, you could say, and I've had people say this to me over the last couple of days, like, well, you just keep him. and you get the comp pick a year later or whatever. You just having an unhappy player in your locker room, let alone two of them, is not a great formula if you're trying to win. And also, comp picks are not guaranteed. To your point, with all the cap space they might have next season, and as good as the free agent class is, you go sign three of those guys, it offsets everything you lose, and you're not going to get any comp picks. It's not guaranteed. You got to take the guaranteed capital now. Plus, they ended up getting a 2 for DK instead of a 3 if he had walked last year and they hadn't signed anyone else in free agency. So I understand this, and I do acknowledge that the range of potential outcomes here is massive. This could, if they nail this offseason, they could be a Super Bowl contender. I truly believe that. They could also be in the running for the first pick in the draft next year if this doesn't go well. So I acknowledge that. It's a massive, massive risk anytime you move off a good quarterback. And it's what I've been warning people about for the last couple of years that wanted Geno off this roster. Now you get what you wish for, but be careful because it doesn't always work out great. It's the hardest position in professional sports to fill. I'm convinced of that, and nothing will ever change my mind about that. And if you have a good one, it's really hard to improve upon that player. So it could go either way. Again, in a very sick and twisted way. That's kind of what excites me. Like, I get off on this stuff a little bit, but you know who else probably does? John Schneider. Like this is probably some of the most fun in a weird way. Like, some of you might not understand my use of that word. This might be some of the most fun he's ever had as a GM.
Yeah, and I understand those comments and stuff because the NFL is a lot different than, like, say, the NBA, where, you know, the NBA, it's 82 games, it's a slog, and there's something to, you know, making the playoffs and kind of being in that middle. In the NFL, that, you know, it's not too bad, but like, there's still something about being in purgatory. And I think it's been fun. It's been enjoyable to have the hope for the last decade. Oh, I think we got a shot to win the division this year, right? And if I'm correct, we have won the division 2 times in the last decade. So, like, and one of those years we didn't even get to have fans in the stands, and we lost our first game. So, like, that hope is a little kind of fake. It's not real. And so I'm not saying I want to tank. It reminds me of what Joel Klatt said before the start of the season. I can't remember exactly how he got talking about the Seahawks, but he was on Brock and Salk, and he asked them, he says, close your eyes, and can you imagine you're at the Super Bowl and Geno Smith just won the Super Bowl and he's holding the Lombardi trophy? And I believe he said, I can't imagine that. So he basically said politely, you're stuck. And so, like, if you can't imagine that, then you're not going to get there. And so you have to make decisions and make changes. And that was before the season started and everything happened as it unfolded this year. But I keep going back to that statement because I think I'm in the same spot that Joel was. And so this is kind of what I've wanted. I like Geno Smith. I hope Geno Smith does awesome with the Raiders and with Pete Carroll. And I think he was a great representation of you know, quarterback of the Seahawks during a very difficult time. It's very hard to lose your Super Bowl champion franchise icon and to have a guy that was probably liked even more for the next 3 years. And so that's a testament to Geno.
Yeah.
And so I think it's now. The time is now, unfortunately.
The on the screen from Dogzilla Monster. Thank you for the donation. Says fun to blame folks, but it sucks where we are now. This is a very, very common sentiment right now. Yeah. And I understand where people are coming from. It's a scary place to be because you can project all this stuff and you can read reports and you can hope on things, but it might all go another way. The Steelers might come in and offer Sam Darnold more money than the Seahawks were led to believe that he would sign with them for, and they might lose Sam Darnold. They might have to turn to plan B or C or D at the quarterback situation and get painted into a corner. The same thing could happen on offensive linemen. You know, I mean, everybody seems to assume Dahlman's going to Chicago. Is that just based on speculation, or is there any kind of, you know, hard reporting? I don't know. Like, at first I thought, gosh, they just acquired so much cap space in Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson. And I know they're going to try to extend Thuney. That'll lower his hit and everything else. They're really going to go for Dahlman too. Like, but I get it because Ben Johnson had so much success in Detroit with an elite offensive line. So of course that's where you're going to spend your resources, but it could go off the rails and we could be sitting here 3 days from now going, okay, all those guys that we wanted went elsewhere. Now what? Right. So I just, you know, I want to caution people to be to be patient if you can, because it's kind of like the draft. The way the draft is split into 3 days now, right? If you don't get that guy or you don't address the position in the first round that you think they should have, you have to wait a whole night. I remember a couple of years ago when we were in desperate need of drafting for the defensive line, and we didn't do anything days 1 or 2, and then we took Cameron Young and Mike Morris on day 3, right? It's like we had to sweat out 2 entire days. Like, what are they doing? What's their plan? Well, that didn't work out great, right? Neither of those players have contributed. They had to go make the move for Leonard Williams and draft Byron Murphy in the first round last year. So, you know, it's imperative that they land at least one, like, no-brainer interior offensive lineman. Just a guy that we all universally all look at each other and go, okay, that guy upgrades us. That guy makes us much better at that position. Now what's next? And until that happens, people will panic. You know, it's like what always happens in I know you're a big baseball fan. You've written about it too. Here's a classic example of what I'm talking about. When baseball trades are announced, sometimes the information comes out, the basics of the trade before all the details come out, right? So you find out you just dealt one of your best players to another team, and you don't know what you're getting back for it. And everyone panics and they go, oh my God, that's all we're getting. And then 5 hours later, you find out that you got 3 of their top 10 prospects, and suddenly the trade looks a whole lot different, right? So I just caution people, if they don't sign Sam Darnold, Drew Dahlman, and Will Fries tomorrow, it all might not be lost, right? It's a process. It's a 6-week process before we get to the end of the draft.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, there is a process. The NFL is fascinating because the 3 guys we're talking about that I think everyone really wants to have, because it keeps us in our minds competitive. I think between you and I think it puts us still in the NFC West divisional chase. Sam Darnold, Drew Dahlman, Will Fries. There is a chance that all 3 of those guys have already agreed to their deals before we go to bed tonight. And it's just a formality with this, oh, of course,
Right.
It's all under, legal tampering and stuff. But like a lot of this stuff has happened. But some of the best moves in free agency didn't happen in the first 24 hours, right? The Philadelphia Eagles are a great example of that. They didn't get the hottest players. They got the right players. Saquon Barkley, there was a concern about what he might be able to do. I think there was a hope of the potential and stuff. Mekhi Becton was a bust, right? He wasn't the first guy I think that signed, right away for the biggest contract. And a lot of people have talked about this on social media. It's not about getting the flashiest players. It's about getting the right players. And like this, in certain years, the T. Higgins stuff, like the Seahawks getting T. Higgins is not the way to go. They need to go fix themselves.
Oh, sorry.
You're good.
That was another lucky break the Seahawks got. T. Higgins not getting to the free agent market, I think was huge for DK getting moved for a second-round pick, because the Steelers would have been in on that. I will say this too, to your point on interior offensive linemen, another good opportunity to sort of caution the fan base. There is a chance that maybe Will Fries and Drew Dahlman go elsewhere. Those seem to be the top 2. I know there's some people have come to me with James Daniels coming off an Achilles. That's a concern for me. There are some other guys too. But there are guards in this league that are very, very good starting guards that are unrestricted free agents, that their fans of their teams don't want to see get away, that you have never heard of. I think more so than any other position in the league, outside of like a lot of times with like rotational defensive linemen, you'll see that too. You'll be like, the Seahawks just gave, Joe Smith a 3-year, $45 million deal, and he's going to be our starting left guard. Who the hell is Joe Smith? And then you look him up and you're like, oh, he was a top 10 PFF rated guard. Oh, he's 26 years old. Oh, he's a 4-year starter. Oh, the fans of that team are pissed that he got away. Like, I think that happens more in interior offensive line than maybe any other position.
For sure. A lot of that has to do with where you got drafted, just like a lot of other positions, where you got drafted, and then possibly what happens if I get to go to an outside zone blocking scheme? What happens if I get to go to the son of the, one of the great forefathers of, doesn't matter who's in the backfield, they're running for 1,000 yards, right? Like you and I grew up watching who was it? Griffin, Terrell Davis ran for 2,000 yards. Like, it wasn't just Terrell Davis. It was a bunch of no names, right? That had some amazing years running that system, whether it was in Houston with his dad, Kubiak, or whether it was in Denver when he was the OC and stuff. My only thing I would say on this is offensive linemen aren't necessarily considered sexy, right? Like they're not known as like the high profile signing that gets everybody buying season tickets or excited and stuff of that nature. Dahlman has developed that to where I believe there's a lot of guys that know football that know who he is and like know he's a big deal. I think the Seahawks could sign Will Fries tomorrow, and you and I are going to be very excited. But like some of our casual friends are going to be like, Freeze, like the U of I quarterback, is he related to that? Like, or who the heck is Will? Yeah, who the hell? Yeah, right. Like, whereas I think Dahlman, they're like, oh, is that? I don't know. I just feel like there's a little bit more of that Dahlman where when you move,
I guarantee you, most of the fan base in Seattle did not know who Drew Dahlman was a month ago, and now he's the guy that if we don't get him, Schneider should be fired. That's how it works.
Yeah, and so that's just what the interesting part is this is not how you do a business, but there is a sense that John has to do something in the first 48 to 72 hours. I don't think it has to be in the first 4 hours. I think that's what people are going to be waking up tomorrow when that 9 a.m. hits. They'll be like, I expect to hear somebody in the Seahawks in the next 20 minutes. No, you need to let this process play out over the next 24, 48, 72 hours. That's typically when the first tier of those free agents go. And like I said, I think Seattle will get 2 players in the first 72 hours. And I expect both will probably be along the trenches. Might be defense, might be offense. I think they'll go that route. And then I think you're going to see a lot of Clint Kubiak guys, a lot of Shanahan guys. They're going to be coming in to be a part of just kind of getting through a year while Clint gets his feet under him. Yeah. But it is that weird thing where I think you and I both understand. If they can go get some offensive linemen and just be average in the offensive on the interior, this team's going to be all right. Doesn't matter who's at quarterback because the scheme works and stuff, and there's still enough there, and the defense is so good that I find it really hard for this team to win 4 or 5 games. Like the defense is too good. It's just that other side that you're not signing that person that you're going to put on a season ticket. You're not signing that person that you're going to see on the billboard in the parking garage as you're pulling into Seattle to go watch a Seahawks game. Right. Yeah. And so that's just that interesting thing where you removed the 2 faces of your franchise, and how you respond is going to be very interesting if John cares about that.
Yeah. I wanted to put this up because this has been a popular sentiment for a while. The Jake Browning's a name that hasn't been tossed around a lot. I know he played really well 2 years ago when Joe Burrow was hurt. Of course, he's a guy that played at UW here. He's really well known here. He's a West Coast guy, prolific high school passer. I just don't think that the Bengals are one of the most risk-averse teams out there. I just don't think, and I've asked some people that cover the Bengals, like, would he be available in trade? And they don't seem to think he is. Like, they just value him that much as an inexpensive backup that they can win with should Burrow go down. And Burrow's had injury issues. And then Joe Milton, like we just talked about Matt Flynn. Right. Joe Milton played 1 good game against backups in the last game of the season. He's a guy that I get it. I understand the appeal to fans because he has the big arm, but he had red flags all over him when I evaluated him coming out of Tennessee and that offense and that fit. And I don't think, just because you saw one flashy game where he made a couple of plays and showed off that arm. And I'm sure people remember the combine too, where he threw it 80 yards. Doesn't mean that translates to a good quarterback. And if the Seahawks evaluated him highly, he wouldn't have lasted till the 6th round with New England. They would have taken him last year. And there was a lot of solid reporting over the last couple of days that the Patriots were very much involved in this DK Metcalf conversation. And for a while were considered by some to be the front runner, making a move. They had a ton of cap space. They have a need there. They're trying to surround Drake May with as many weapons as they can, and they really don't have anything like DK. If those conversations happened, then you would think that Milton would have been involved in that too if Seattle wanted him and it didn't come to fruition. I just don't think he's a guy that I would put much stock in other than being a lottery ticket. Also, why would the Patriots want to trade him? You have a young quarterback who isn't fully developed yet, a guy who puts his body on the line at times and runs the football. He's willing to do that. And if he gets banged up and they have offensive line issues, so until they fix that, he's going to be at risk. Why would you trade a 24-year-old really high value backup? I just don't get that.
Yeah. And I think people kind of forget Vrabel inherited Marcus Mariota, right? And that's not who he succeeded with. I think defensive coaches tend to value a backup quarterback more because they're like, that's who they want sometimes as their quarterback, because that's someone that they can control more, control the clock, ball control and stuff. And so I definitely think the way Drake May plays, and for me, Drake May was my top quarterback in last year's class. Like, I'm a huge fan of him, and I really hope that they can do something to get him some weapons before he gets crushed over there behind that offensive line. But Milton's a great backup to have just in case, right? And a guy like Vrabel knows more than most coaches, knows the value of having a good or competent backup quarterback. You can ride that all the way into the playoffs with the right situation and stuff. And so Vrabel's not interested in trading him. And again, I know I might be in the minority. Pick 52 is good value for the lowest value that you're going to get in DK Metcalf. If you want to be pissed, don't be pissed at John Schneider. Be pissed at Ryan Grubb, right? Like, be pissed that Ryan Grubb made him his value to that point, right? Yeah, if you were going to try and get the most value for DK, you would have traded him last year and not seen what happened this year. But you chose to go for it this year, and it almost worked out. You almost won the division, but it didn't. And now this is kind of the consequences of choosing wrong at the offensive coordinator spot.
Yep. Silent Awareness says draft for trenches. Obviously, that's the emphasis. And I would say this to anyone, because now we have to address quarterback, and now we have to address wide receiver, and there's still needs in the tight end room. This draft is so deep in the trenches that even if they make moves at the top of the draft that you think are a little bit just sort of luxury picks, they take a wide receiver in the first round, maybe they take a safety on day 2 or whatever. Like, don't worry, because this draft is deep enough that they can address the trenches all the way through it if they want to. And I don't think John's done on just because, as we said, that all the starters are locked up now and that foundation is solid. It's just, they're going to add in free agency to the defense as well. Maybe a big move like a Jonathan Allen. We've talked about that. They might even, with some of their extra picks, they could trade for Trey Hendrickson, right? Like, they could make that move if they wanted to. We know they tried to get Max Crosby early on when they were offering DK and Geno to the Raiders. So they still might have interest in doing that. But at the very least, they're going to sign a couple of guys that they think fill roles on the defense as well. And so I would just, tell those people to just chill. Now, I want to ask you about another guy. If they should strike out on Darnold, or maybe Darnold's not the choice, despite all of the reporting. I've seen a lot of this. Zach is asking, Jimmy Garoppolo isn't better than Darnold, but he isn't that far off. 34 years old, a couple of years under McVay, a couple of years under Shanahan before that. He would certainly be a natural fit for the offense. If that were the move, how would you feel about Jimmy Garoppolo?
I would definitely feel uneasy, but then I would start to get excited because that means I know the Seahawks are taking a quarterback pretty early, either at 18 or, like I said, they're going to package 50 and 52, and they're going to try and get a pick between 30 and 35. Yeah. And so, that's where our franchise quarterback is. Jimmy Garoppolo. I grew up in a 49ers family, right? So I've heard a lot about Jimmy Garoppolo.
His name taken in vain.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The Jimmy G and the Michael Crabtree were the two curse words I remember the most growing up and stuff, of talented players that never quite stepped up in the moment when they needed to, as Seahawk fans are very well aware. Thank you, Crabtree. But Jimmy G, 5 years ago, threw a really nice ball. Was a streaky quarterback that if you get him in the flow, you get him in the timing, he can get you into the playoffs and play well. And, a couple of those playoff wins were a little fluky, amazing running games. I think the NFC Championship win over Green Bay, he only threw the ball 8 times. When they upset Green Bay, one of those years, they got a punt block for a touchdown and stuff. And so if you're drafting Jimmy G, it's to make sure that the offense knows how to start to run this Kubiak scheme. You're not signing Jimmy G because you're trying to go to the Super Bowl, win the NFC Championship. He is there to help. He's a Jackson Dart, right? Will Howard, or any of these quarterbacks. Hey, this is how I do this. This is how I do this. This is how I throw the bonehead interception in the third quarter that lets the team get back into the game. That is what you bring him in for. There's other routes you can go, but I would not be stunned if they bring him in and it's very clear. Hey, the Steelers signed Sam Darnold or whoever, and we are going to go the path of it is very clear at 18, we are open for business for a quarterback. And if we don't like one there, we'll take one at 37 or something like that.
All right, man. I think it's we just hit 2 hours and 10 minutes. 1,500 of you watching. Really appreciate everybody being in here. Got to have a bunch of guests. I'm glad you were able to make it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I gotta take a nap because I gotta get up in 5 hours and talk to Rob Staten from London, and got to account for to try and squeeze him in. Got to account for the time difference. And it's funny when Rob and I finalized this a couple of days ago and got our schedules together, I thought we were going to be talking about a lot of what ifs, like what if, what's going to happen with Gino? Is his bonus is due in a week, and what if DK gets traded? Well, now it's all done. So can't wait to get some of Rob's thoughts on what's happened and kind of how he sees the roster being built moving forward. So y'all can stay tuned for that in the morning. I'm going to record it, as I said, in the middle of the night, but it'll be set for probably 8 a.m. Pacific time to drop tomorrow. But yeah, also I want to rest up as much as possible because tomorrow's going to be a grind, man. I think today kind of was like a sort of a precursor to that. Like the moves just happened all day long. If I had $1 for every time I refreshed Twitter today, I'd be doing okay. So
yeah, no, shout out to Rob. That dude has been talking about this stuff for 2 years.
Yep.
And he has nailed it. And I know I watch his show. He's taken a lot of arrows, him and his team. And I don't think like he's, calling anybody out right now, but like he has nailed a lot of this stuff. And so he's a good guest for you to have on after just an insane, I would call it a very heavy weekend, but like you said, it's nice to rest tomorrow. And I feel like a lot of people are going to wake up tomorrow with a sense of uneasiness, but also like, all right, we got a lot of money to spend. Let's see what we can go do. And I think that's the exciting part.
It's going to be like waking up on Christmas and hoping your parents didn't just screw the whole thing up. Like just hoping you got what was on your gift and, anything or on your list, anything not on your list. You might not like it at first, right? But then maybe after you play with it for a while, you learn to love it. And I think that's an apt analogy. And I also get it. There's a ton, I'm seeing it all through the comments. Like there's a lot of emotion. And among the fan base, there's a lot of arguing back and forth. There's people that are very strong on one side of the fence or the other. And I think it's a great example of how like sports is an emotional thing. And we get attached to these players. And sometimes we get more attached to the name on the back of the jersey as the front of the jersey. Some people that I have considered to be the most passionate fans that I've interacted with over the last few years have said things over the last couple of days like, that's it, I'm out, I'm not a fan anymore, I don't care, until John Schneider's gone or whatever. Like that's not how I'm ever going to think. I'm always going to think, okay, that hurt. I hate losing Tyler Lockett. I wanted DK to be on this roster. I wanted Gino to be on this roster, but they're not anymore. So what's next? That's what this show is about. That's how my brain works. It's what I enjoy about that aspect of roster building and team building. And, but I fully understand the emotions and why some people are having a hard time with this. So thanks for coming on and helping me figure it out. Let's take it out. Let's take it out this way. Let's go here. So at Seahawks Forever on Twitter and Blue Sky. And again, check in tomorrow. My plan for tomorrow is, the Rob Staten episode will hit early in the morning before free agency starts. And then I'm not going to be in my studio during the day tomorrow. But if big signings happen during the day, I will react to them from wherever I am, from my car, from Starbucks. I'll go live from the Mesa Apache Junction Starbucks if I have to tomorrow to react to this stuff. And then tomorrow night, join me. I'll do another live show with a mock draft, including all the new draft picks. That'll be fun to play around with. Thank you again to Michael Thompson. Thank you to Mookie Alexander and Bryce Coots. If they're still live, hop over there and watch those guys after this. Until next time, forever and always, go Hawks.